The tale opens at the academy with a sudden explosion. Haruto, the protagonist, is knocked to the ground. A green-haired man mocks him, questioning if he was really hit by basic magic. As Haruto struggles to rise in pain, the man sarcastically praises his resilience. Standing, Haruto demands the promised item, having delivered what was requested. The man holds up a bag of rare sirloin burgers, a coveted school lunch, confirming he got enough for everyone. The green-haired man teases about a missing drink, suggesting Haruto should have been more thoughtful. He then conjures a fireball in his hand. Hurling the fireball, he shouts that Haruto deserves another hit for forgetting the drinks. The attack sends Haruto crashing to the ground again. Rising once more, Haruto is mocked by the men for his apparent weakness. A furious woman interrupts, demanding to know what they're doing. The men recognize her as a disciplinary committee member, known for her strictness. The green-haired man throws his phone at Haruto, telling him to be grateful as it's all he's getting today. The phone cracks upon hitting the ground. Friends Shin and Ohm rush to Haruto, concerned, as he picks up the broken phone. The woman checks on him, but Haruto warns her to stay away, fearing she'll be ostracized for associating with him. She insists she doesn't care about the consequences. Haruto snaps that they can't survive in this place if they cling to childhood friendships. He storms off, leaving her calling after him sadly. Entering the school building, students whisper about Haruto, the special admissions student with no magic ability, questioning his place in the elite academy. Rumors swirl of a scoring error or a stand-in for his entrance exam, leaving Haruto himself doubting how he, an underachiever, was accepted. His parents abruptly informed him of his special admission, but he never got the chance to ask why. Gazing at the sky, Haruto wonders if he should have perished with his family that day. Lacking magic, Haruto couldn't pursue the academy's main course. Forced to train as a swordsman in a magic-dominated society, he's deemed useless in melee combat and a burden in dungeon raids, surviving as his family's sole remnant. They mockingly call him the God of Plagues. After classes, Haruto returns to his apartment. At his door, he spots an unusual letter. Sitting down, he examines the letter, noting it lacks a stamp or sender's name. Despite the letter's odd appearance, Haruto chose to open it. Peeling back the sealed sticker, he was startled as a brilliant light burst forth. The light engulfed him, leaving him in shock, and the letter inexplicably pulled him inside. Opening his eyes, he found himself in a vibrant, colorful realm, anxiously questioning his whereabouts. As he stepped forward, the water beneath parted, revealing a shadowy figure. The shadow, grinning, declared it was 2054 by the Western calendar, and asked if he was truly 16-year-old Kaju Haruto, to which he nervously confirmed. The shadow revealed it was Haruto's future self, also named Kaju Haruto. He explained that he sent the letter from the future, where, in a decade, Haruto would master space and time as a mage. Unwilling to wait, his future self decided to train him now to become a grand mage of space and time. Haruto, bewildered, struggled to grasp the shadow's words. His future self, acknowledging his doubt but urging trust, instructed him to enter the F-rank Shinjuku Imperial Garden dungeon alone, promising to reconnect afterward before vanishing. Soon after, Haruto entered the Shinjuku Imperial Garden, an F-rank dungeon. He noted that a cleared dungeon like this held little of value. Skeptical, he warned his future self that if this was a prank, he'd face consequences. His future self dismissed the threat, urging him to burn the letter if he wished, and directed him to go straight and turn right at the end. Frustrated, Haruto followed the instructions, only to face a wall. Annoyed, he declared he'd hit a dead end and asked if he could destroy the letter, but his future self calmly instructed him to insert it into a slit in the wall. With a sigh, Haruto slid the letter into the slit, and to his astonishment, the slit glowed, and the wall parted, revealing a passage. He stepped through, unaware of any hidden routes in the dungeon. Suddenly, a bright light illuminated the dark passage. Before him appeared a massive crystal bound by chains. His future self identified it as a skill cube, asking if it was Haruto's first encounter, and urged him to touch it to gain its power. Hesitant, Haruto approached and touched the cube, only for his future self to suddenly apologize. The skill cube cracked and turned red. A purple light enveloped it, and a portal opened above. The portal began pulling in surrounding debris, forming something in the air. As the debris settled and the smoke cleared, a massive figure emerged before him. Frozen in fear, Haruto saw glowing eyes, and a golem lunged toward him. Its single bright eye locked onto him, making him question if it was truly a golem. Before it struck, sending him crashing back in pain. Vision blurred. Haruto wondered if he'd been deceived. Racked with severe injuries, Haruto felt his body burning intensely. As his consciousness faded, he feared he was dying. Glancing at his phone, He saw images of his mother, father, and sister Ria, whispering that he could finally join them. The letter glowed, and his future self challenged him, asking if he was content to die pointlessly after failing at the school his parents chose, deceived by his own future. The question shocked him back to awareness. He recalled his wretched life devoid of joy, yet he realized he'd accepted this misery as his fate. He admitted he'd given up. Defiant, he declared he wasn't okay with such an end. His future self urged him to resist, survive, and transform his dismal life. As the golem's attack loomed, Haruto didn't dodge and was struck fatally, but defiantly told it not to underestimate him in such a place. Suddenly, a system message revealed a hidden quest in the F-rank Shinjuku Imperial Garden. Haruto had fulfilled the requirement for the indomitable spirit of space and time. His death was nullified, and his body underwent a rollback. Opening his eyes, he felt certain he would survive. The skill cube shattered, releasing a powerful force that surged into him as he lay there. To the golem's surprise, Haruto stood upright. His body crackled with electrified energy. The system confirmed he'd acquired space-time magic, including quick body material, rewind, and stop chain. It also granted him the space-time mage's passive skill, level 1 potential unleashing, with a 30% boost. Staring at his hand, Haruto, confused, asked what was happening. His future self explained that awakening required extreme conditions and apologized for not warning him. His future self revealed that space-time magic wouldn't be discovered for another decade, tied to a hidden quest only Haruto had encountered. Haruto questioned if his future self was truly from the future. His future self simply noted he looked alive and warned that the tutorial was beginning as the golem prepared to crush him. When the golem attacked, Haruto sensed it and turned, dodging its hand with a timely leap. His body felt light, and he wondered if this was the passive skill's effect. His future self promised to teach him how a space-time mage fights, urging him to feel the flow of time rather than rely on sight. Haruto complied, focusing on the world's temporal flow. His future self proudly affirmed that he could succeed, as they were one and the same. As the golem's massive fist swung, Haruto stood still, concentrating on sensing the flow of time. As the golem's fist closed in, mere inches away, he snapped his eyes open, locking gazes with the creature. With a swift leap, he narrowly evaded the crushing blow. Channeling his space-time magic, he materialized atop the golem's outstretched hand. With agile precision, he darted forward, sprinting along the golem's arm. Reaching its shoulder, he hurled his sword toward the golem's head, declaring the core within as its weakness. Plunging his blade into the golem's skull, he drove it downward with relentless force. The golem's head fractured under the assault, splintering further with each moment. At last, the head shattered explosively into fragments. He descended calmly to the ground, walking away as the golem's body crumbled behind him. After his victory, his swordsman skill surged by 8 levels and he earned 45,800 credits. Gazing at the system interface, his future self spoke, questioning his belief and dubbing him the god of plagues. Clutching his sword firmly, he responded with cautious acknowledgement to his future self. His future self instructed him to leave the dungeon for the next critical step, and when he asked if more tasks remained, the reply confirmed there was indeed more to do. His future self revealed a brief detour. They needed to head to where Shin and Ohm would face death by a monster that very day. Stunned by the revelation, he halted in his tracks, grappling with the weight of the words. He demanded his future self repeat the statement for clarity. His future self clarified that he was referring to his childhood friend and others who would perish that day. The group, including his friend, would enter the Ikebukuro-ranked dungeon and fall to an extra boss monster. Bracing himself, he shifted his stance as his future self urged him to save Shin and Ohm and alter their fate. As he sped out of the dungeon, his future self hailed him as a mage of space and time. While racing forward, his future self specified that on May 23, 2054, in the Western calendar, deep within the Ikebukuro D-ranked dungeon, an unforeseen C-rank extra boss would emerge, leading to the death of Shinan Omrin. Despite a party member's desperate rescue spell, the absence of nearby adventurers led to their complete annihilation. Though Shin and Ohm weren't entirely to blame, he cut off his future self's explanation with a sharp command to be silent. Moments later, he reached the Ikebukuro D-ranked dungeon. Drained and breathless, he questioned why his future self hadn't warned him sooner. His future self countered, reminding him of his choice to avoid others, believing his presence brought misfortune to those around him. Pointing out his comfort with being ostracized, his future self questioned why he was so enraged for someone else's sake. Abruptly, goblins encircled him, halting his advance. But his future self dismissed his sudden introspection, urging him to stay focused. He swiftly drew his sword from behind his back. As the goblins lunged in unison, he dispatched them with rapid, precise slashes. His future self declared that his actions could reshape the world. Brushing off the advice, he snapped at his future self to be quiet, vowing to act on his own terms. Acknowledging his resolve, his future self approved, offering to teach him a new application of space-time magic as a reward. Meanwhile, a massive explosion echoed from the dungeon's deepest floor, accompanied by piercing screams. Shin and Ohm were hurled into the air amidst the chaos. She crashed heavily to the ground, her friends frozen in terror as they witnessed her fall. They desperately shouted her name, but excruciating pain kept her from standing. Opening her eyes, she was confronted by the towering C-rank extra boss, the Dark Sentinel, looming before them. A man yelled in frustration that they weren't warned about this foe, while a woman, frantically trying to summon aid, cried out that the rescue spell was unresponsive. Another woman called for composure, insisting that a unified attack could give them a fighting chance. The man, gripped by fear, refused to fight, declaring he wasn't ready to die. As the Dark Sentinel's massive sword blazed with energy, the woman sharply rebuked the man, urging him to focus. The Sentinel swung its sword, striking the group and hurling them into the air. Struggling to sit up, she was horrified to see her friends scattered and fallen, many unconscious. Amid the chaos, she spotted a friend, barely alive, pleading for help. Gritting her teeth, she forced herself to stand and unleashed her firepower at the Dark Sentinel. Her attack struck its head directly, but it left no mark, leaving her paralyzed with dread. The Dark Sentinel raised its massive sword, swinging it down toward her. Tears streaming, she shut her eyes and cried out for rescue. At the last moment, a man appeared, using his stop-chain skill to freeze the Sentinel's strike. He quickly checked if she was unharmed. Stunned by his sudden presence, she could only stare as he turned to face the enemy. He ordered her to stay back, focusing on the Dark Sentinel. Releasing his stop-chain, he drew his sword from behind. He leaped aside, narrowly dodging the Sentinel's blade. Circling behind it, he struck as it spun to attack again. He blocked its blow and aimed for its stomach, hoping it was a weak point. But the Sentinel's armor deflected his strike, revealing its near-impenetrable defense. The Dark Sentinel unleashed a fierce assault, which he deftly parried with his sword, struggling to match its relentless power. Despite his efforts, the overwhelming force shattered his sword, splitting it in two. The Dark Sentinel glared with furious intensity, prompting a muttered curse from him. Channeling energy through its glowing eyes, the Sentinel aimed a devastating blast at him, unleashing a powerful explosion that shook the surroundings. With swift agility and precise timing, he dodged and reappeared behind the Sentinel, aware that his sword was useless against its armored body, but could strike vulnerable, unarmored areas. He deduced that the head was the key target. As the Dark Sentinel spun to face him, he hurled his broken sword at its head, recalling his future self's warning about the weapon's imminent failure. He confidently acknowledged his future self's warning, activating his material rewind skill. As his shattered sword began to mend itself, he hurled it toward the Dark Sentinel's head, which was charging another powerful attack. The sword's tip struck the Sentinel's head just in time, piercing through its helmet. The Sentinel's head lost its power, allowing him to land safely on the ground. His future self remarked that he had seemingly altered fate itself, while Shin and Ohm watched in stunned disbelief. Moments later, Shin and Ohm hurriedly rushed to his side. Shin and Ohm, bewildered, demanded answers about the chaotic events, shouting for clarity. Still, she first expressed heartfelt gratitude for his rescue of her and her friends. He downplayed her thanks, earnestly begging her to keep the incident under wraps for now. After a brief pause, she asked if this meant it would be their shared secret. Confused, he confirmed it would be just between them. Her smile widened, and she pressed him about the source of his earlier power. But as he started to respond, his future self interrupted, warning him to avoid reckless talk of space-time magic to limit future complications. He halted, heeding the caution, but asked Shen and Ohm to keep his next words confidential as well. Though puzzled, she listened as he explained he was caught in complex events and preferred to stay unnoticed. His future self urged him to mislead her to deflect suspicion, but Shin and Ohm overheard the voice, questioning if it was him, to which he, startled, denied any connection. Glaring at an unseen letter, he silently vowed to confront his future self later. Sighing, he told Shin and Ohm he'd been honing a unique swordsman skill for ages, still imperfect and not ready for public knowledge. She nodded with a smile, agreeing to guard his secret, relieving him as his quick deception succeeded. She smiled and said she understood, and if that was truly the case, she would keep his secret. A response that made him exhale in relief, realizing he'd successfully misled her, so effortlessly. The tragic fate that was supposed to claim Shin and Rin was avoided, and at the same time, Haruto acquired immense magical strength and power. Though he couldn't change what had already happened, he knew he still had control over what lay ahead. Then, out of nowhere, someone mockingly called him the God of Plagues, and as he turned around, he saw a familiar bully at the doorway, laughing and jeering at him. Moments later, another man chimed in, saying he heard Haruto had entered the Ikebukuro dungeon yesterday, only to flee uselessly and empty-handed. A second teased that they'd even encountered an unexpected boss and were forced into an impromptu training session, which made them all laugh. He then sarcastically asked his friends if such behavior was typical of the God of Plagues, but Haruto was preoccupied, wondering who could have witnessed the event besides Shin. The identity remained unknown. The bully then claimed his friend had also been there, but ended up seriously injured and was now hospitalized, with high medical bills. He subtly gestured for money, implying that Haruto should compensate them. If he did, they promised to stay quiet. When they asked for a response, Haruto remained silent, which only angered them further and made them demand he speak. One of the men summoned flames into his hand, warning Haruto that he'd once again be their target for attack practice. That's when Haruto snapped, shouting that he'd had enough, prompting the man to stretch his arms and aggressively demand he repeat it. Haruto defiantly repeated himself and insulted them, calling them deaf trash, which sent the group into a furious rage. Enraged, the men launched an attack on him, shouting insults and calling him a bastard. But thanks to his enhanced stats, Haruto could easily track their movements. In a swift counterattack, he took them down one by one and calmly appeared behind them. They froze in terror, looking around in confusion, unable to grasp what had just happened. Haruto warned them in a cold tone. They were to stay away from him or face the same consequences. In his hands, he held their wallets and a lighter. One of the men protested, yelling that those were theirs. But Haruto casually flicked the lighter and said this was their promise. Then, seriously, he asked them what they had said. They nervously nodded in agreement and bolted. Haruto figured that would be the end of their harassment and headed back to class. A little later, seated at his desk, he noticed the next subject was magic capacity measurement. The teacher announced the beginning of the semester's test and called his name. He responded affirmatively and walked up to the front. Knowing his base magic capacity was nearly non-existent, he wondered what the result would be now that he was a space-time mage. Curious, he decided to try channeling his space-time magic into the mirror. He placed his hand on the mirror and infused it with his power. A moment later, he opened his eyes. The mirror glowed brightly, and the teacher stared in stunned confusion. Suddenly, the mirror shattered into fragments with a loud explosion, knocking the teacher off his feet and leaving the class in stunned silence. Haruto regretted acting so boldly, realizing he'd drawn too much attention to himself. In the background, Shin and Ohm chuckled quietly. After school, as he left the building, he overheard whispers, students speculating whether he was the God of Plagues who destroyed the magic device. Some mentioned it was a form of unknown magic, and others were in disbelief, suggesting if it were true, he might be ranked above them all. Haruto reflected on how different these rumors were from the ones in the past, and how much more draining they were. Suddenly, someone called out to him, catching him off guard. The voice urged him toward the bushes, and what appeared there left him speechless. A fluffy stuffed toy was talking, and he instantly recognized the voice. He asked if it was the same him from the letter and why it looked like a plushie. His future self replied, explaining that it was a form of space-time magic possessing one of his household's toys. Haruto asked if that explained everything, but the future version only stressed the urgency of the situation. The Chaos Dragon had appeared far earlier than expected. Haruto asked for clarification. What was the Chaos Dragon? The future self explained grimly. The Chaos Dragon had already destroyed the local Adventurers Guild, causing massive casualties and widespread destruction. It was classified as an alpha-level extermination target, an extremely dangerous threat. Just as in his timeline, his future self emphasized that since the dragon had surfaced early, defeating it was now absolutely critical. Haruto told his future self that if they failed, the same catastrophic events would unfold again. His future self confirmed that this was exactly what had happened in his timeline. Alarmed, Haruto insisted they contact the Adventurers Guild to request a high-ranking extermination squad, arguing that even the Chaos Dragon could be handled with enough power. But his future self shook his head and said it was too late. time had run out. At that moment, a heavy, ominous sound echoed from above. Haruto looked up and was stunned to see the Chaos Dragon soaring through the sky. He questioned if the dragon wasn't supposed to be confined to a dungeon, but his future self explained that it was a feral, migratory species, not one to stay put. As the dragon passed overhead, Haruto cursed in panic, realizing that if it kept flying in that direction, it would reach the school and people would die. Meanwhile, the students were leaving the school cheerfully, chatting among themselves, until everything went dark as the dragon cast a shadow over them. Looking up, they froze in horror, unable to comprehend why a dragon was above them. As the dragon stared them down and dived, they screamed and fled back to the school in terror. A commanding woman ordered everyone to prepare for combat, telling non-mage students to evacuate to the dormitories. The mages quickly organized and took their positions. Haruto ran after the dragon, shouting back that the students ahead were mage security from the student council. The council's mages formed a magical circle and took aim at the descending dragon. They launched a barrage of magical attacks at the beast, and the woman raised her staff, commanding her team to hold the line and not let the dragon near the campus. She cast a large-scale magic circle above the dragon, then unleashed a massive spell that detonated in a blinding explosion. Her team celebrated, thinking the dragon was defeated, and she smiled at their praise. But that smile vanished as a furious growl rose from the smoke. To their horror, they realized their magic had done nothing. The dragon was immune to anti-dragon spells. It charged a blast in its mouth and fired straight at the mages. The attack struck them directly. They had no time to react. The explosion devastated the area, instantly taking down the entire student council's magical security unit. Haruto's future self noted grimly that this was expected. They were just students. Haruto snapped back, saying now wasn't the time for commentary, but his future self calmly called his name. And before Haruto could respond, something was thrown at his head. He asked what it was and the reply came. Dragon incense, a magical scent that lures dragons. The future self explained that the dragon, being a low-intelligence migratory predator, would now target only him. The Chaos Dragon locked onto Haruto and dove at him in a furious charge. His future self told him firmly that he had to face it. This was his moment to show the power of a true space-time mage. The dragon glared with murderous rage, and his future self shouted that the dragon was heading straight for them and urged Haruto to run, which he immediately did. Suddenly, a voice called out, asking if they were okay. Haruto turned in surprise and saw Shin and Ohm helping the injured students. His future self asked if he truly wanted to keep Shin and Ohm out of this chaos. Haruto firmly said yes. Taking that in, his future self advised that the best option was to retreat. Fewer witnesses meant a safer battlefield. Activating his quick body skill, Haruto dashed off, the Chaos Dragon relentlessly chasing him. Before long, he arrived at JR Nakano Station in Tokyo City. His future self pointed out that the train yard was empty at that time, and told him to jump the fence to lure the dragon inside, which he did without hesitation. Once they were safely inside and awaiting the beast, Haruto asked about the dragon's traits. His future self explained. It was a dark element dragon with deadly breath attacks that could kill instantly, and it exuded a miasma that caused a debuff known as the delay effect. It also had resistance to physical attacks, meaning careless strikes were useless. Haruto asked if this was really the same monster from 5 years in the future. His future self confirmed it was, but clarified that this one was still immature, which made it vulnerable to the dragon incense. Haruto nodded, but was stunned when his future self revealed the incense cost 500,000 credits. Shocked, Haruto asked if he meant it, a whole 500,000? His future self calmly confirmed and mentioned he'd withdrawn it from Haruto's bank account. Outraged, Haruto grabbed him and demanded how he even knew his PIN number. His future self said nothing, prompting Haruto to curse in frustration. Trying to calm him, his future self reassured that the money would be easily recovered, and the reward for defeating the dragon would be well worth it. Besides, he said, the money was just a bonus. The real prize would be a skill cube dropped by the dragon, one that granted a new space-time magic spell. Refocusing on the battle, his future self explained that since the dragon wasn't fully grown, its weak spot, the dragon core, would still be visible. Just as he was about to reveal where the core was, the dragon appeared above them, growling fiercely. It launched a powerful attack at them, but they both dove to safety in time. As the dragon prepared another blast, Haruto drew his sword. His future self shouted a warning, to which Haruto sarcastically responded with thanks for the help. Relying on his quick body spell, he dodged the dragon's successive attacks with skill. When the barrage stopped, he called out to his future self, who was dodging behind him, that he had managed to survive the assault. But he was suddenly blindsided by another blast, which hit him hard, making him scream as the explosion engulfed him. Through the smoke, the dragon noticed a glowing blue light. To its shock, Haruto shot out from the mist, shouting that he was attacking from 5 seconds ago. His future self watched in awe, realizing that Haruto had just instinctively invented a real-time combat use of space-time magic under pressure. Haruto launched himself toward the dragon's exposed core, instantly recognizing it as the weak point. He struck at it with all his strength, but to his confusion, the blow didn't connect. It felt like hitting air. Suddenly, the core pulsed with energy, and the dragon began to fade before his eyes. Landing on the ground, he turned to his future self, frustrated that he hadn't been warned about this ability. His future self admitted he'd forgotten that the Chaos Dragon could convert its body into miasma, and advised him to be more cautious when attacking. Haruto sighed, scolding his future self for not sharing critical information before the fight began. The warning wasn't over, though. The future self explained that the dragon could also solidify its miasma to spawn an army of miniature dragon-like creatures called a legion. Right on cue, the Chaos Dragon unleashed a swarm of these figures around him, making Haruto question if this was truly just a juvenile form. He realized it couldn't be defeated with conventional tactics. His future self noted that the dragon wasn't even supposed to appear for another 5 years. Haruto demanded to know why it had appeared now. The response was blunt. It was likely a consequence of Haruto changing the timeline. Now he had to take responsibility and defeat it. Groaning in frustration, Haruto asked if that meant everything happening was his fault. Suddenly, one of the smaller dragons lunged at him, trying to pin him down, but he managed to dodge using his quick body spell. Another attacked, and this time he cut it cleanly in half. Seeing it vanish upon defeat reassured him. These minions didn't turn into miasma like the main body. His future self advised him to clear out the small fry and wait for an opening. But Haruto snapped back that he was already doing just that. Focusing his energy into his foot, he aimed for his targets. Leaping into the air, he slashed through each of the small dragons mid-flight, trying to dispatch them quickly while conserving stamina. Soon, his future self noted that he had wiped them all out, and leveled up 3 times in the process. But Haruto was visibly winded. Haruto asked if the Chaos Dragon had finally run out of minions. But before he got an answer, the dragon reappeared and fired another blast at him. He barely had time to react, jumping clear of the blast. Just as it exploded and obliterated the ground beneath, he narrowly avoided being caught in the aftermath. To his dismay, the dragon began charging another attack. He bolted from his position, watching as even the hall melted under the dragon's destructive power. Already worn out from the smaller skirmishes, he realized his stamina was nearly gone. He would need a few more minutes to recover before going all out, but knew his only option was to strike at the core again. With determination, he rushed at the dragon, but stopped short when it soared higher into the sky. His future self, smirking, told him that his attacks wouldn't reach it up there. Haruto cursed under his breath, growling in frustration, and began scanning the area for anything that might give him an edge. Haruto's eyes landed on some unused shipping containers and idle train cars, and an idea sparked. He realized that if he pulled it off, he might be able to reach the dragon. His future self, noticing the growing danger, asked what he was planning. Haruto didn't respond. Instead, he grabbed the plushie and sprinted ahead with it. He leapt up the containers and climbed a nearby pole, prompting his future self to shout that even from that height, he still couldn't reach the dragon. Haruto replied coolly that he was aware. He swung the plushie backward to build momentum, then hurled it straight at the dragon, shocking his future self. At that moment, he cast his stop chain spell on the plushie. Then, using the suspended plushie as a mid-air anchor, he leapt toward it and launched himself at the dragon, stunning his future self. As he landed, he shouted that he wouldn't let the dragon shift into miasma again, and used stop chain to restrain it. He knew the effect wouldn't last long, just a few seconds. But that would be enough. Struggling against the dragon's hardened core, he drove his sword toward it, noticing his chain magic weakening. With one final push, he forced his blade deep into the core. As the stop chain shattered and the dragon began to break free, he poured all of his magical power into the sword, and finally shattered the Chaos Dragon's core. The dragon let out a pained roar. The core cracked and exploded violently, while the plushie crash-landed face first on the ground. A minute later, Haruto emerged from the smoke, sword broken in hand, but victorious. He had defeated the Chaos Dragon by himself. The dragon's corpse dissolved into fading particles, and a system message appeared. His level had increased by 15, swordsman skill by 28, and he had earned 872,300 credits. He also obtained the rare item, Chaos Dragon Fang. The system advised him to check options for upgrading to Adventurer rank C and recommended visiting the nearest Adventurer Guild. His future self remarked that Haruto had performed exactly as expected and admitted he'd used him to gain footing. Irritated, Haruto questioned what he meant, but was ignored as his attention turned back to the system messages. It now showed that his hidden skill, space-time magic, had increased by 20 levels, while both material rewind and quick body improved by 2 levels. His space-time mage, passive skill also rose by 2 levels, unlocking 50% of his potential. His future self said they had succeeded in preventing a repeat of the catastrophe. So overall, it was a job well done. Suddenly, he sensed movement and warned Haruto that someone might have reported the incident, which could lead to trouble if they were discovered. Without wasting time, he hopped onto Haruto's shoulder and said they had to leave. Haruto agreed. For once, they were on the same page. He vaulted back over the fence and sprinted toward his apartment. Once inside, he grabbed some food and opened it, recalling something. He turned to his future self and asked if he really needed to eat all of it. His future self dryly replied that obviously a plushie couldn't eat, and maybe he should try applying some basic common sense. Haruto shot back that if common sense applied here, then a talking plushie was already completely insane. Just as he was about to eat, a memory surfaced. Something important he had nearly forgotten. He stood up and walked over to his small desk. Pouring a drink into a cup, he placed it gently in front of the family photo and softly told his mother, father, and little sister Ria, "I'm home." His future self watched in silence. Haruto quickly added that he better not make fun of him for this. His future self quietly assured him that he wouldn't. After all, he was him. Still, his future self decided to keep quiet about Ria, telling himself it was too early for Haruto to know, but promising he'd tell him when he matured more as a space-time mage. Haruto then mentioned the Chaos Dragon Fang he obtained earlier, and his future self pointed out that Haruto's current sword was barely holding together. It was perfect timing to replace it. He also suggested skipping school the next day to go forge a new weapon. The following day, they arrived at the Adventurers Guild, specifically the Shinjuku Metropolitan Government Office Branch. Haruto commented that he once believed this place had nothing to offer a low-tier adventurer like him. His future self smiled proudly, saying that it was only possible now thanks to Haruto's growth. But Haruto, not buying into the praise, walked into the building reminding his future self that they'd go straight home after this, and warned him not to wander off. In the reception lobby, a voice announced that number 23 should proceed to the counter. It was their turn. Haruto stepped forward, and the receptionist asked for the reason for his visit. He explained he had completed a dungeon and wanted his results checked. Handing over his card, he noticed the receptionist sizing him up, clearly thinking he looked unimpressive for an adventurer. Still, she took his card and politely told him she'd take a look. She inserted the card into the terminal, and a glowing panel appeared in front of him. She asked him to place his hand on the panel to confirm his identity before they could review the results. He followed the instruction and placed his palm on the screen. The receptionist began checking his status. Her eyes widened in disbelief. In just one day, he had ranked up all the way to C, something she found hard to believe. She stammered, wondering aloud if there was a glitch in the system. As people started turning their heads and staring, Haruto realized the commotion was drawing far too much attention, and that was the last thing he wanted. He hated being the center of drama or trouble. Thinking quickly, he used material rewind on the system and calmly told the receptionist, who had her back turned at that moment, that the identity check had already been completed. She turned back to check, and upon seeing the updated status showing a high rank, her confusion deepened. She asked what had just happened. Haruto casually asked the receptionist if something was wrong, but she nervously replied that everything was fine and returned his card. Though in her mind, the whole situation felt unusually suspicious. He accepted the card with a polite thank you and walked away. After he left, the system automatically reverted his rank display to its original value, rank C. His future self complimented him on using material rewind so cleverly, noting it was important they minimize any major changes to the timeline. A few minutes later, they stood in front of an elevator. Haruto asked if this was where they were supposed to be. His future self said no, and told him to step inside the elevator anyway. Haruto obeyed and waited as the doors closed and ascended. When they opened again, He realized they'd arrived on the rank A floor. He reminded his future self that they weren't allowed up there unless they were rank A adventurers. Ignoring the concern, his future self turned into a glowing letter. Staring at it in confusion, Haruto heard his future self instruct him to scan the letter at the gate's security panel. Haruto hesitated, pointing out they were in a high-security area, but his future self insisted. Reluctantly, he held the letter to the scanner. The rank. A gate opened with a quiet hiss, and Haruto stepped inside. His future self told him it was time to begin synthesizing a weapon worthy of a space-time mage, which brought a smile to Haruto's face, filled with anticipation. He asked if this was some kind of field trip, but then noticed a man typing intently on a computer nearby. His future self clarified that it wasn't a field trip. They were there to request weapon synthesis. The man turned to them and asked if Haruto was at least a rank A adventurer, introducing himself as Shirai Arma Takumi, the chief of the Weapon Synthesis Laboratory. Eyeing Haruto skeptically, Shirai remarked that he looked more like a low-tier student and accused him of possibly tricking security to get in. Haruto's future self whispered that he should show him the thing. Haruto presented the Chaos Dragon Fang, explaining that it was a rare drop from a formidable enemy, and asked if it could be used to craft a new weapon. Shirai closely examined the fang and acknowledged its impressive quality. He then asked if Haruto was the one who had actually slain the creature. Haruto confirmed that he was. Shirai inspected Haruto's current sword and nodded thoughtfully, tapping something on his smartwatch. A synthesis machine in the center of the room powered on, glowing faintly. Shirai explained that this was Japan's most advanced synthesis device, the pinnacle of otherworld technology. He added that the Chaos Dragon Fang wasn't even listed in the guild's materials database, so he would analyze it for research and let Haruto use the device free of charge. He asked Haruto to notify him when the process was finished. Haruto set down his bag, and his future self commented that since he'd never done weapon synthesis before, it was time to teach him how. A system interface popped up, indicating that the synthesis training was only available for adventurers ranked either below or above a certain threshold, hinting at its exclusivity. Haruto took a few steps into the synthesis chamber as his future self began explaining the process, which was broken into 4 main steps. First, he had to select a base weapon, in his case, the Academy-issued sword. Second, he needed to choose the attribute he wanted the weapon to possess. The number of attributes a weapon could hold depended on its rank, and since his sword was only rank F, it had 1 available attribute slot. The third step involved choosing the material used for enchanting. Materials could be from various categories, minerals, metals, or even bones, and in some cases, even 2 weapons could be merged. But for his synthesis, he would use the Chaos Dragon Fang. Finally, after setting all those parameters, he would begin the synthesis. The outcome would also depend on how much magic and effort he poured into the forging. Haruto nodded, indicating he understood. He inserted his old sword into the machine as the base item. The system then prompted him to choose from elemental attributes: fire, water, wind, earth, or light. His future self said they didn't have many options and recommended choosing light, which Haruto agreed to. A compartment opened on the side of the machine, prompting Haruto to ask if this was where the strengthening material should go. He placed the Chaos Dragon Fang inside, and the compartment closed. As he was setting the forging time, his future self suddenly suggested setting it for 3 years, which left Haruto shocked. He protested that he couldn't wait that long, but his future self insisted, so he reluctantly complied. The machine began its synthesis process, stating that the weapon would be ready in 3 years. Then, to Haruto's complete surprise, his future self leapt into the machine, entering the inner chamber just as the machine powered up. A powerful surge of energy pulsed through the room, ending in a loud explosion. The machine's system voice then calmly thanked him for waiting and declared the synthesis complete. It unveiled a chaos sword imbued with the light attribute and officially classified as rank A. Haruto's future self reappeared in plushy form, visibly drained, confirming that the synthesis was real. Haruto, stunned, asked if it was truly complete, to which his future self affirmed, though he warned that this kind of process couldn't be repeated often. Shirai Arma, still present, was in disbelief, unable to fathom how a 3-year forging process concluded in seconds. He began typing frantically into the system, trying to make sense of it all. Meanwhile, Haruto's future self urged him to hurry and leave. Haruto sighed, placed the sword into his inventory, and joked that he never thought he'd be the one saying, let's go." He thanked Shirai Arma and prepared to leave, though the man tried to stop him. As he walked away, Haruto overheard part of a conversation about a mysterious rumor. One man told his friend about someone who had supposedly slain a ferocious migrating species in an instant, and wondered aloud what kind of person could achieve such a feat. The friend speculated that if the person's identity were discovered, it would ignite a fierce recruitment war between elite clans, and mused that he hoped to be scouted by rank A mentors someday. But the first man cynically added that someone like him, a rank D, would never see it happen. Hearing this, Haruto thought the situation was getting out of hand and said to himself that they needed to leave immediately. However, his future self, now back in plushie form, disagreed and suggested they seize the moment and test out the new sword. Haruto turned to him and asked, "Where?" It responds by directing them to the location where the sacred beast, Cerberus, dwells. He freezes in shock, confirming if he really just heard the name Cerberus. At that moment, Shin and Ohm appear before him, clearly distressed and calling his name. With tears in her eyes, Shin and Ohm expresses overwhelming relief that he's alive. She explains that she was told the monster that attacked the school was targeting him specifically. She adds that she's been sending him messages for a long time with no reply, and points out that he didn't even show up to school that day. Overcome with emotion, she yells at him for making her worry so much, leaving him flustered as he asks why she's even there. She snaps back, saying she should be asking him that, and explains she came as a student representative to deliver an application for a student-led dungeon raid. He recognizes her and recalls that she's the top-ranking second-year student in the mage program. His future self quietly urges him to keep things brief and avoid revealing unnecessary information. He replies that he knows. Still emotional, she wipes her tears and reiterates how glad she is that he's safe. He sheepishly scratches his head and apologizes for making her worry. As she looks up at him after drying her tears, she notices the stuffed toys sticking out of his bag and asks about one plushie in particular, commenting on how adorable it is. She reaches into his backpack, taking the plushie out for a closer look. Hugging it, she notes that it somehow carries his scent, which makes her feel calm. He becomes nervous, thinking it's odd, but then a clever idea strikes him. He offers to let her keep the plushie for a while if she likes it that much, surprising his future self. She says she'll return it later and thanks him. As he walks away, telling her not to worry about it, she admires the plushie happily. He thinks to himself that at least he managed to change the subject. She cheerfully waves goodbye, while his future self angrily calls after him, demanding not to be left behind. The next day, at the high school division of the cultivation agency, his future self remains silent, prompting him to urge it not to stay mad, reminding it that he did come back to get it right away. The future self yells that that's not the real issue. It reveals that what truly matters is he got to see his childhood friend again after 10 long years, and it was all thanks to him. With emotion, the future self thanks him sincerely. He responds that it's good for him too, not realizing someone is secretly recording him from above. The observer identifies him as Kaji Haruto, the so-called god of plagues, and becomes intrigued, deciding to make Haruto his next target. With a smirk, he tells Haruto to entertain him and dubs him Mr. Mysterious Dragon Slayer. Meanwhile, in the student counseling office, someone slams their hand on the desk in frustration. Vice President of the Student Council, Sakura Yuzuki, demands to know if he truly knows nothing about the incident. He insists he doesn't, and Yuzuki recounts how the day before yesterday, right after classes, a dangerous migrating species attacked. She says she heard he ran in the same direction the monster was last seen heading. He explains that the creature changed targets mid-attack, redirecting its attention to another student. He believes that student is the one who ultimately defeated the monster, and that it was a very close call. Yuzuki then asks if he knows who that mysterious student is. He shakes his head, explaining that he was too focused on escaping at the time to notice anything else. She sighs, saying she understands. As he walks toward the door, he tells her he needs to leave since class is about to start. She calls out for him to wait, but he exits the room anyway, wondering why he's being treated with suspicion. His future self answers that it's likely because of the live footage, showing him leaping toward the dragon and defeating it instantly. He asks if they can use space-time magic to stop the video from spreading, but his future self tells him it's impossible with their current abilities. Letting out a sigh, he walks into his classroom, taken aback by the buzz of his classmates, but proceeds silently to his seat. One student excitedly comments that things are about to get interesting. As he sits down, he reflects that he's already used to being ignored in class, but today's atmosphere feels different from usual. Suddenly, Shin and Ohm rushes up to him, urgently shouting for him to stay alert and move away. Someone interjects, saying she doesn't need to say anything more to Haruto. A third-year student from the high school division, the student council president Sumer Agiri, steps forward and tells Shin and Ohm he'll handle the rest. He formally introduces himself as Sumer Jogirewa, the school's reigning genius magician and highest-ranked student, essentially the most powerful figure in the school. He then asks if he's speaking to Kaji Haruto, and Haruto confirms. Ruga declares that he's here to challenge him to a magic duel. Haruto's classmates begin whispering and mocking him, assuming he's doomed. But Haruto meets Ruga's gaze with a serious look as Ruga smiles calmly. Ruga accuses him, a so-called failure with zero magical capacity, of breaking the device meant to measure magic power, noting that traces of an unidentified substance were found at the scene. He also adds that Haruto is the one who defeated the fierce Chaos Dragon by himself. Haruto is stunned, wondering how Ruga knows all this. But Ruga simply says he finds it fascinating. That's why, he says, it would be wise to extinguish the threat early. Provoking an angry glare from Haruto, Ruga then proclaims that the truth must come to light, and reveals that he too has slain a dragon solo. Therefore, he proposes a duel to determine who truly deserves the title of Dragon Slayer. Haruto recalls that a magic duel is an official trial overseen by the Adventurer Cultivation Agency, meant to fairly measure students' real combat prowess. The results of such duels determine each student's rank, with top-ranked individuals enjoying numerous privileges and being seen as prime candidates for future positions within the Adventurers Guild. The only strict rule is that no spells can be used which may result in death, permanent injury, or lingering effects. The right to propose and choose an opponent in a duel lies with the lower-ranked participant. Haruto also remembers that those of higher rank are obligated to accept a challenge, while those of lower rank can decline, meaning there's absolutely no way he'd willingly accept a duel against the school's #1 student. Ruga then turns to Shin and Ohm, warning her to be more careful about the company she keeps if she truly hopes to join the student council next term. His gaze lingers on her body as he makes a sleazy remark about giving her a personal lesson to help her understand things more clearly. He adds, with a smirk, that he'll also teach her what it really takes to join the student council. Uncomfortable and tense, she awkwardly thanks Ruga for his guidance and the experience. Ruga grins smugly at her discomfort, while Haruto clenches his fists, burning with silent rage. Unable to hold back, Haruto rises to his feet and calls out to Ruga. He boldly announces that he accepts the duel, leaving Shin and Ohm stunned. Just as Ruga begins to respond, Haruto declares that he has one condition. Ruga raises an eyebrow and asks what it is. Haruto calmly replies, "The loser must leave the academy for good." Ruga smirks, turns his back, and accepts the condition without hesitation, adding that it's too late for Haruto to back out now. Later, during break time, Haruto eats while his future self comments that he's becoming more sharp-tongued, more like him, and warns that Ruga is not to be underestimated. Haruto asks if he knows Ruga personally, and his future self confirms, explaining that Ruga will one day become the chief of the Adventurers Guild's Shinjuku branch. He goes on to say Ruga will develop many powerful fire-based spells and eventually rise to the rank of one of the 7 sages. Haruto scoffs, calling that title more foolish than wise. His future self agrees, stating that despite his fame, Ruga's personality is rotten to the core. From that point forward, Ruga will abuse his power to take advantage of countless women under his command, proving he's a true scumbag. His future self continues, noting that Ruga also excels at gathering allies. It's likely he discovered Haruto's identity as the Dragon Slayer through informants in his faction. And although he's despicable, Ruga's magical prowess is genuinely exceptional, so his reputation as a genius isn't entirely undeserved. Haruto's future self admits that the current Haruto doesn't stand a chance against Ruga and suggests they take a look at his stats. Haruto opens his status window. He's a level 15 swordsman. His skill levels are swordsmanship, level 31, and space magic, level 34. His stats are power 61, agility 159, defense 9, magic power 0, intelligence B, mental strength B+, and growth potential S. His known spells include Quick Body LV Nauseous, 2, Stop Chain, and Material Rewind LV. His future self remarks that he's grown significantly. Then, with a touch, his future self changes the system display and warns that Haruto's stats pale in comparison to Ruga's. Haruto, startled, asks if he can actually view Ruga's data. The screen reveals Ruga's stats. Level 78 Mage. Skills, Fire Magic 76, Water magic, 52. Wind magic of 56. Earth magic. Attributes, power, E. Agility 475, defense 789, magic power 642, intelligence A, mental strength B, growth potential B. His future self tells him there's nearly a tenfold gap between them. Shocked, Haruto asks if they can see other people's stats too, wondering aloud if this is really space-time magic, and struggling to accept the massive difference in power. Just then, he hears a nearby girl sobbing, crying that she suddenly lost the ability to use magic and fears failing the upcoming exam for the maid's course. Through tears, she laments that she has no idea why her magic no longer works and is terrified of failing. Her friend gently assures her that her wand work, chants, and casting techniques are all fine. Nothing seems wrong. The girl then asks in despair if the only option left is to accept a private lesson at Ruga's place. Haruto is stunned into silence when he overhears the girl reluctantly agree to the private lesson, whispering that she just wants it to end quickly as she prepares to undress and shut her eyes. The scene reminds him painfully of Shin's frightened expression during her encounter with Ruga. Burning with anger, Haruto clenches his fist and steps toward the girls, politely asking if he could have a moment of their time. The two girls are startled and ask who he is, wondering if he's from the swordsman course. Haruto assures them that they don't need to go through with any private lessons. He promises to handle everything himself. He then raises his hand slightly toward the girl and begins to concentrate. He recalls the magic capacity measurement class, realizing he can now perceive the flow and mechanics of magic. He observes that her internal magic circuits have suffered damage, burnout essentially, and her channels are congested because she tried casting spells beyond her current capabilities. He understands that the right approach is to clear out the disturbances in her circuits to restore her natural magic flow. Opening his eyes, he gently tells the girl not to be alarmed. Drawing closer, Haruto channels his power and releases it into her body, precisely targeting her magic pathways. The sudden sensation leaves her momentarily disoriented, and her worried friend cries out in panic. Her friend, clearly upset, demands to know what Haruto did, but he calmly tells the girl to try using magic now. Still stuttering, Yuko agrees hesitantly, while her friend checks to see if she's okay. Yuko tries casting a spell and is stunned to find her magic working again. She cheers in joy, amazed that her magical output even feels stronger than before, while her friend stares in disbelief. Watching her laugh and play with magic again, Yuko turns to Haruto and thanks him with heartfelt gratitude. Haruto humbly replies that there's no need to thank him. Tears of joy in her eyes, Yuko tells her friend that now she won't have to go through that terrible ordeal with Ruga, and her friend breathes a huge sigh of relief. Haruto's thoughts flash back again to the frightened look on Shin's face when she was cornered by Ruga. After school, his future self appears silently beside him, watching. Haruto turns and asks what he needs to do to become stronger. With only 3 days until the duel, he wants to shrink the power gap. He then asks his future self to recommend a dungeon that would best boost his growth and that he's capable of tackling now. His future self smiles and says the next dungeon's map and intel are already prepared. Haruto eagerly asks what the clear rewards are, and his future self answers: a massive amount of experience points, new space-time magic spells, an opportunity to test a newly synthesized weapon, and even a beast companion to summon. Haruto grins in satisfaction, saying that's exactly what he wanted. He then enters the Crystal Labyrinth, a zombie-ranked dungeon typically recommended for adventurers level 65 and up. While excited by the challenge, Haruto feels overwhelmed as hordes of enemies close in around him. His future self asks if he thinks it's worth the effort. Drawing the Chaos Sword, Haruto responds confidently, yes, and thanks him. His future self tells him not to let a single monster escape, and Haruto firmly agrees. Haruto charged into the fray, shouting with determination that he would take down every monster roaming the dungeon. An hour later, deep within the Crystal Labyrinth's innermost chamber, a male adventurer slashed at a heavily armored monster, but to his horror, his sword shattered upon impact. His female companion quickly stepped in, activating her staff and yelling for him to move aside. She then launched a powerful flame jet spell at the armored creature. With pride, she taunted the monster, asking how it liked her attack. But when the smoke cleared, both were stunned to see the Dark Crystal Knight still standing, nearly unharmed. Its stats showed 23 HP, 50 mana, 340 attack, 610 defense, and B-rank magic resistance. Terrified, they clung to each other, realizing their attacks had barely scratched it. As the knight raised its weapon to finish them off, they closed their eyes, bracing for death. Suddenly, an unknown force intercepted the knight's blow, triggering a violent explosion. The man opened his eyes, only to find a mysterious figure's sword embedded in the knight's head, slicing through it and reducing the monster to fragments. The girls stammered in disbelief that they were saved, while the man gratefully thanked their rescuer. Haruto, the mysterious savior, told them that monsters appear in overwhelming numbers here and urged them to leave the dungeon immediately. The man hesitated, asking what Haruto would do. Haruto replied calmly that he would serve as a decoy to draw the monsters away. As more knights gathered before him, he told the pair to escape quickly. The man apologized for fleeing, but expressed his gratitude again before running. Once alone, Haruto's future self appeared and noted that including the ones just now, Haruto had defeated 89 monsters, but still hadn't reached even half his goal. Haruto acknowledged this, fully aware of the challenge ahead. His future self urged him to hurry and level up as fast as possible. Haruto raised his sword and resumed the fight, slashing at nearby enemies while his future self explained, "These monsters grant the most experience in the entire Crystal Labyrinth. Though at Haruto's current level, they remain formidable foes." Sensing an ambush from behind, Haruto spun around and unleashed his stop chain skill, catching the encroaching knights off guard. His future self reminded him that his Chaos Sword was infused with light elemental energy, giving him the necessary edge to battle these dark attribute monsters effectively. Surrounded again as more knights converged on him, his future self encouraged him to eliminate as many as possible. Haruto activated his quick body technique, rejected the idea of retreat, and roared that he would not let a single one escape. His surge of power forced the knights back as he expertly deflected every blow aimed at him. Spotting an opening, Haruto unleashed a flurry of slashes, cutting down all the knights before him. He took a brief moment to breathe, only to be caught off guard by a massive knight charging at him. It was the Dark Crystal General, a boss-level monster with fearsome stats. 48 HP, 125 mana, 560 attack, 880 defense, and A-rank magic resistance. His future self confirmed that this opponent was indeed a boss-class threat. Haruto braced himself and blocked the general's powerful sword strike with his own blade. Struggling against the sheer strength of the general's assault, he fought to avoid being overpowered. Realizing he was on the verge of being overwhelmed, Haruto decided to activate his sword's special properties. The weapon vanished from sight, and in that instant, he managed to leap out of the way, dodging the Crystal General's crushing strike. His sword then reappeared, allowing him to zip behind the enemy at blinding speed. With all his might, he swung and sliced through the general's neck, finally slaying the formidable foe. Breathing heavily from exhaustion, he suddenly heard his future self call out. Haruto snapped back, shouting in irritation, demanding to know what it was. He was still fending off the remaining knights. Calmly, his future self replied, explaining that while Haruto probably understood this already, it was worth saying again. The principles of time magic are fundamentally different from regular magic. Time magic doesn't draw on magical capacity. Instead, it taps into a unique force that governs the world's temporal flow, which is why even someone with no mana can use it. Still in combat, Haruto shouted back in disbelief that this wasn't the right time for a lecture. His future self simply responded that the best time to learn is under extreme pressure, exactly like now. With the knights closing in, Haruto unleashed Stop Chain, hitting every enemy in front of him, then followed up with a lightning-fast series of slashes. But he sensed another threat from behind. His future self warned him not to let his guard down. Turning around, Haruto saw a group of dark crystal sorcerers, each with 12 HP, 490 mana, 210 attack, 320 defense, and magic resistance. The sorcerers began channeling mana into their hands, preparing a synchronized assault. Seeing Haruto freeze in place, his future self reminded him, "You're a space-time mage. Act like it." Snapping back to his senses, Haruto swiftly evaded the first wave of magic. His future self added that even in combat, he should never lose awareness of the Chronos factor. As more magic blasts sped toward him, his future self urged him to seize the flow of time. Haruto responded instinctively. Everything slowed down as he partially froze time itself. Yet one magical attack still made contact, resulting in a violent explosion. As the smoke dissipated, Haruto emerged, pointing a magic circle toward the sorcerers. Raising his other hand, he gathered space-time energy, then unleashed it all in a devastating blast that obliterated the enemies instantly. Looking down at his hand in awe, he asked if this is what it truly meant to manipulate the flow of time. His future self confirmed it and added, Haruto had just released a chrono ray, and he might even possess greater talent than his future self did. A moment later, After clearing a heap of knights and pausing to catch his breath, system messages began flashing in front of him, signaling continuous level-ups. Ignoring the alerts, he asked his future self what their next destination was. He then made his way to the innermost chamber of the Crystal Labyrinth. Awaiting him there was the dungeon boss, the sacred beast Cerberus. Just as he was about to enter the boss gate, a sharp pain surged through his head. His future self explained it was a side effect of prolonged space-time magic usage. It placed intense strain on the brain. Then he asked Haruto if he wanted to turn back, but Haruto simply placed his hand on the gate and replied no. There was no time to waste. With unwavering resolve, he stepped forward to face the monstrous Cerberus. Haruto's future self warned him not to let his guard down. This boss monster wasn't like the others. Cerberus possessed honor and a rare sense of dignity. The sacred beast growled menacingly and advanced with heavy steps, while his future self mused that, in old-fashioned terms, one might say this magical beast had the soul of a samurai. Haruto gritted his teeth as the strain from time magic worsened the pain in his head. Something his future self noticed right away, all while Cerberus locked eyes with him unflinching. His future self handed him a bottle, urging him to drink it. It wouldn't heal him completely, but it would ease the pain. Haruto nodded and took a swig. To his surprise, Cerberus sat down as if waiting patiently, making Haruto wonder, was this monster actually letting him recover? Still in disbelief, he drank the potion while the boss monster silently waited. His future self pointed out a scar on the creature's right flank, an old wound, and advised him to target it. As the intimidating aura of the beast returned, Haruto couldn't help but wonder if the Cerberus truly meant to give him a fair fight, and if he, in turn, owed it respect. The moment passed. Cerberus lunged forward, slashing with razor-sharp claws. Haruto barely evaded the strike and drew his sword in response. He scanned its body and found the old wound on its chest. But before he could act, the Cerberus was already in front of him, moving at blinding speed. Haruto blocked just in time, and the Cerberus pounded down with immense force on his blade. He struggled to maintain his grip as the beast's jaws tried to crush his sword. Realizing he couldn't win in a power struggle, he let go and leapt over the creature. But one of Cerberus's other heads began to gather energy. His future self shouted a warning. It was preparing a breath attack, and he needed to dodge now. Haruto twisted in the air just as the attack was about to fire, and narrowly evaded the blast. Spotting an opening near the wound, he channeled power into his fist. With precision, he struck the vulnerable spot, causing the beast to roar in pain. He jumped back to reposition, when his future self paused in confusion. Cerberus was staggering and shaking all three heads, and his future self asked in disbelief if Haruto had just healed its old injury with some kind of pressure point technique. Haruto confirmed it. He had repaid the beast's earlier mercy and wanted to fight it fairly, with no advantages. His future self yelled that he was insane, that this could get him killed. But Haruto stood firm. He said respect had to be mutual, even if the opponent was a monster. Besides, if he died here, it would be the only legacy he left behind. Suddenly, the Cerberus tossed something to him. His future self was stunned. It was Haruto's sword. The monster had returned it. The beast stared at him with steely eyes. It understood what was happening, but Haruto held up a hand and refused. Clenching his fists, he declared that he'd fight barehanded. This wasn't about farming XP. It was a proper dungeon boss duel, a straight-up brawl. The two stared each other down, while Haruto's future self could only watch, baffled by the strange honor forming between them. Then, without warning, Cerberus lunged again. Haruto tried to block, but a clawed strike sent him flying. He smashed into a crystal wall but quickly recovered and sprang back into action. He landed a punch on one of Cerberus's heads, throwing the beast slightly off balance. But then one of Cerberus's other heads clamped down on his arm with its jaws. The beast dragged him violently and slammed his body into the crystal wall. Haruto cried out in agony, and his future self called out his name in alarm, urging him to stay conscious and pull himself together. At that moment, all three of Cerberus's heads began to simultaneously gather magical energy. Haruto activated his time flow manipulation again, slowing down the attack's buildup. Gritting his teeth, he vowed to give this everything he had. As his skill wore off, the Cerberus unleashed its combined breath weapon toward him. Haruto, still crouched low, narrowly escaped just in time, reappearing beneath the massive creature. Summoning all his remaining strength, he launched a punch upward, praying his body wouldn't give out. He continued delivering rapid, furious blows to Cerberus with everything he had left. But then, pain flared in his arm and blood began to drip. It was the wound from the earlier bite. Cerberus lashed out again with its deadly claws, but Haruto focused his energy into his fist and struck the beast's neck with a forceful punch. Cerberus let out a piercing howl of pain. Haruto jumped and spun, delivering a crushing kick, declaring that this was the final blow. His kick struck the middle head, shattering the ground beneath it. The beast collapsed, defeated at last. Haruto lost his footing, staggered, and jokingly asked if he'd always been such a muscle-headed idiot before blacking out. A system notification confirmed that the zombie rank dungeon, Crystal Labyrinth, had been cleared. A short while later, he regained consciousness to someone asking if he was finally awake. He turned and saw his future self watching over him with visible concern. Sitting up, Haruto murmured that somehow he had managed to win. The system informed him that he had gained 20 levels, and he was stunned by the massive growth. He also noticed a new item, the space-time mage robe, and curiously asked what it was. His future self casually replied that it was formal mage attire and suggested they check it out later. Suddenly, the light around them dimmed. Haruto turned and was shocked to see Cerberus again, now calmly approaching him. Instinctively, he stood up in caution. But then the three-headed beast wagged its tails like an oversized puppy, looking at him with a mix of curiosity and bewilderment. Haruto reached out and gently patted it, while his future self remarked that the beast seemed to have taken a real liking to him. Haruto asked, just to be sure, "Wasn't this supposed to be the final dungeon boss?" His future self admitted that this outcome was entirely unexpected, but they'd received the reward regardless, so he wasn't complaining. Haruto assumed he meant the equipment, but his future self clarified. The true reward was the summoned beast, the sacred beast Cerberus, the greatest prize for clearing the Crystal Labyrinth. However, the bond wasn't official yet. His future self explained that by offering his blood, Haruto could seal the contract. Without hesitation, Haruto bit his finger and let a drop of blood fall into the Cerberus's mouth. The sacred beast slowly began to fade, and his future self told him that from now on, he could summon Cerberus whenever he wished. The system notified him that the sacred beast Cerberus was now officially his vassal. His future self remarked that with this, their mission was complete. 3 days later, at the Adventure Cultivation Agency's high school division, students murmured in surprise as Haruto passed by. His uniform was torn, his face bandaged, and he looked like he'd just come from a battlefield. Shin and Am spotted him from behind and rushed over, worriedly asking where he had disappeared to and why he hadn't responded to her attempts to reach him. Haruto casually answered that he had been doing a bit of special training to get ready for the upcoming duel. She pressed him, asking what kind of training could leave him in such a state. Haruto replied with quiet confidence that, no matter what, he was now ready. His determination made her pause. She stared at him, questioning whether he was still the same Haruto she used to know. Neither of them noticed Ruga watching from a tree nearby. Ruga, who had assumed Haruto had run away long ago, grinned in disbelief that he'd shown up and was even willing to make a fool of himself in public. Not long after, they crossed paths in the hallway, and Ruga coldly reminded Haruto that their duel would happen today, right after classes. Ruga added a mocking title, asking if Mr. Mysterious Dragon Slayer was ready to face his fate. Haruto simply responded with a yes. Ruga then reminded him of the high-stakes condition they'd agreed upon. Haruto confirmed. It was true the loser would have to drop out of school, but Ruga said that wasn't exciting enough. Haruto asked what he meant. With a dramatic flair, Ruga swung his cape and proposed they raise the stakes. An additional bet of 100 million credits, roughly $640. Haruto was visibly shocked by the absurd amount. The boys behind Ruga laughed and taunted him, daring him not to chicken out and ruin the spectacle for everyone else. Haruto's future self, still connected to him, realized Ruga had cleverly manipulated the crowd to corner Haruto and eliminate any chance of backing out. It was classic Ruga, cunning and ruthless. Haruto felt Shin and Am gripping his hand tightly. He could see fear in her eyes as she looked at Ruga, who smirked triumphantly, already fantasizing about stripping Haruto of everything and turning him into his pawn. Shin tried to stop him, stammering, but Haruto calmly responded that he accepted. He was fine with the 100 million credit wager. Ruga turned away with a grin, telling him he was looking forward to their magical showdown. Before leaving, Ruga turned to Shin and warned her that she had sided with the wrong person, so she should prepare herself for a personal lesson he intended to give her. Her fists clenched in fear, but Haruto gently told her not to worry. When she looked up at him, he met her gaze and assured her with unwavering confidence that he would win. After classes, Haruto made his way through the corridor when his future self reminded him that it was time. Haruto replied that he was aware, but then came to a stop when he encountered a group of students blocking his path. They pretended it was a coincidence, then mockingly suggested they play with him before his duel. Another group appeared behind him, mentioning they'd get a 1 million credit reward each if they beat him down. A bounty had been placed. Haruto said nothing, prompting the students to taunt him further. They asked if he was scared, laughing that even begging and crying wouldn't save him now. But Haruto muttered to himself that it was actually a relief, confusing the surrounding students. He then said he was glad to see Ruga still relying on the same old predictable tricks. He called Ruga such a pathetic cliché that it was almost entertaining. But now, he had the strength to crush that cliché completely, and they were all going to be the first ones to experience it. One of the students pointed his sword at Haruto, cursed at him, and told him not to get cocky before lunging into attack. Haruto casually grabbed the attacker's face and slammed him into the floor, cracking the tiles beneath. He turned to the others and, clearly annoyed, told them to come all at once if they were going to. Meanwhile, in the Adventure Cultivation Agency's arena, Ruga complained loudly, mocking the idea of calling Haruto a dragon slayer. All Haruto ever did was talk big, and now he wasn't even showing up, just wasting everyone's time. He turned to the referee and suggested that if Haruto didn't arrive within a minute, he should win by default. The referee agreed. Students around Ruga chimed in, saying Haruto was foolish for trying to fight him. Most assumed he'd run off scared. Ruga smirked, confident his lackeys had already dealt with Haruto. Elsewhere, Shin sat in the audience, silently praying for Haruto. Just then, a student yelled out. Haruto had arrived. Ruga spun around in shock as Haruto calmly walked onto the stage. He demanded to know what Haruto was doing there. Haruto replied flatly, "Wasn't this the duel they agreed on?" Ruga couldn't believe it and thought back to the group he sent after Haruto, not realizing that all of them had already been knocked out in the corridor. Haruto turned to face Ruga, telling him it was time to get started. He asked the referee to give the signal, and after a moment of nervous hesitation, the referee agreed. The duel was officially announced. Sumer Aguirre, Class 3A, versus Haruto, Class 2F. The referee shouted for the duel to begin, and Ruga started to panic. He couldn't understand how Haruto made it this far, but swore to end it himself now. Ruga shouted that he'd go all out right from the beginning, and activated his flame magic, engulfing the entire stage in fire. He slowly approached Haruto with a mocking tone, asking if he was ready to be burned. Haruto's future self warned him. Ruga was starting with the Hellfire Guard spell, a high-tier flame technique. Ruga gathered fire into his palm and hurled it at Haruto, yelling for him to die. The attack was real. Ruga wasn't holding anything back. Haruto responded by activating his material rewind skill. He noticed that the flame bullets were disturbing the flow of time itself. He could trace their past and future paths within the distortion. By watching their movements closely, he could predict exactly where they would go and dodge at the right moment. As the fireballs closed in on him, he easily avoided them. Ruga screamed in disbelief, refusing to believe what he was seeing. But then, as Haruto stepped forward, the ground beneath him ignited, catching him off guard. He leapt away just in time to avoid getting scorched by the fiery surge. Ruby cried out in disbelief. Haruto had managed to evade even his double-layered trap attack. Ruga, stunned, looked up only to see Haruto above him, already preparing another strike. Haruto unleashed his chrono ray at Ruga, blasting him down with such force that the ground shattered beneath him. The crowd was stunned, gasping in confusion. What was that technique? How could someone with zero known magic capacity pull it off? Shenanigan, on the other hand, simply cheered, shouting how incredible it was. She acknowledged aloud that this Haruto was no longer the boy she once knew. Stepping onto the stage, Haruto looked down at Ruga and asked if he was finally ready to stop holding back. Ruga quickly rose to his feet, provoked by the taunt. Enraged, he charged at Haruto, yelling for him not to underestimate him. Haruto calmly waited, observing as Ruga's spell ignited. Flame Dragon's Ardent Fist, a blazing melee strike heated to 3000 degrees. The flames only burned what the fist touched directly. Despite the danger, Haruto caught the fiery punch with his bare hand, making Ruga grin smugly. Thinking Haruto had doomed himself. Anything the flames touched would ignite, including him. But in an instant, Haruto kicked at Ruby's leg, throwing him off balance, and slammed him hard to the ground, still gripping the burning fist. With the blazing hand pointed straight at Ruga, the latter began to panic, sweat beading on his face. Haruto then drove the fist downward, but purposely missed, slamming it into the stage instead. Raising his hand, he told Ruga that the flames were now gone. Ruga sprang to his feet, retreating with a shout, calling Haruto trash who was doomed to fail anyway. Glancing back at his allies, Ruga asked if they were ready, and they responded by unleashing their energy. The men transferred their magical power into Ruga, dramatically amplifying his strength. Haruto's future self silently acknowledged it as a bold, though blatant, violation of the rules. He asked Ruga mockingly how much borrowed power he actually needed. But Ruga only laughed, his body beginning to morph. His feet transformed into monstrous, flame-covered limbs as he activated his ultimate secret technique. Streams of light and fire coiled around him, and a surge of magical flame energy erupted across the battlefield. Haruto stood, momentarily frozen in disbelief. He witnessed Ruga's horrifying transformation into a demon engulfed in blazing flames. His future self explained that Ruga had become a giant, fused with the magic of dozens of advanced mage students, far beyond what ordinary tactics could counter. Haruto simply nodded. He understood. Ruga then attacked with a massive breath of fire, but Haruto narrowly escaped by leaping away just in time. He retaliated with another chrono ray, only to find that it had no effect on the transformed Ruga. Ruga followed up by releasing flame claws, trying to seize him, but Haruto barely dodged the burning assault and crashed into the wall, cornered with nowhere left to run. Flames encircled him as Ruga advanced, and panic gripped Haruto. In desperation, he activated his flow of time skill, and within the distorted timeline, he noticed something unusual. A tear. Deep inside Ruga's demonic form, he saw a rupture, a weak point. If he could expand it, he might be able to destroy him. But before he could act, Ruga's enormous palm came crashing down to crush him. Just as Ruga was certain of his victory, Haruto suddenly slashed at the demon's massive hand, shattering it into fragments. Leaping out, he shouted to his future self, asking to use the plushie once again. Though clearly irritated, his future self relented, transforming into the teddy bear and admitting there was no other choice. Haruto grabbed the plushie and hurled it, activating his stop chain technique, then used his quick body skill to launch himself toward the airborne plushie. Using the momentum of the chains, he vaulted high above Ruga. Reaching the top, he activated his flow of time skill again, spotting the same tear in the temporal flow within Ruga's body. Raising his sword, Haruto slashed into the gap, tearing the demon form apart and exposing the controller hidden inside. Ruga cried out in disbelief, demanding to know what was happening. He stared at the unraveling magic, shouting that it should be impossible. If the chant continued, the spell should endlessly regenerate the giant. Clinging to Haruto's collar, Ruga shouted in confusion, insisting there was no magical principle that could explain this. Haruto responded with a punch to Ruga's stomach, knocking him out cold. He then turned to the host and calmly asked what was next. The host, stumbling over his words, finally declared, "The winner is Kaji Haruto." Later, Rin and her friends gathered around a table brimming with food. With a smile, Rin called everyone to attention and told them to say it together. "Congratulations on your big win, Haruto!" They all cheered. Flustered, Haruto thanked them shyly. Rin raised her glass and invited him to do the honors. He lifted his glass, a bit nervous, and stammered out a toast. The girls laughed and joined in with joyful cheers. They clinked their glasses together in celebration. And one girl sighed with relief, happy that Ruga was now leaving the school. Another chimed in, criticizing how Ruga acted like the academy was his own kingdom, bribing people and even committing sexual harassment. One girl turned to Rin and commented that if things had gone on any longer, Ruga might have ensnared her too. Rin, flustered, admitted that was probably true. Then the purple-haired girl curiously asked about the 100 million credits that were on the line in the duel. Haruto blinked and confessed he'd completely forgotten about the bet, leaving everyone stunned. They scolded him for letting such a huge prize go to waste. He simply smiled and said he was never in it for the money, prompting the girls to swoon, calling him cool. Just then, Akane called out to him and asked about his relationship with Rin, making Rin nearly spit out her drink in shock. She turned to Akane, flustered, and demanded to know what she meant. But Akane continued casually, saying Haruto had picked a fight with the school's top-ranked student, all for Rin's sake. She pressed him for answers. What was the meaning of that? What was their relationship? Haruto froze, unable to reply. As he struggled to find words, the girls leaned in with eager eyes. But instead, he mumbled an excuse about needing to use the bathroom. As he left, Akane sighed and told the group that he had fled. The purple-haired girl watched him go and said she could sense a change in Haruto. The girl with black hair nodded, agreeing. He seemed more composed, more mature. Not long ago, he was practically invisible, mocked with a terrible nickname. But now, everything had changed. Rin reflected that ever since that day, Haruto had always been by her side, protecting her, supporting her, and she believed with all her heart that it would always stay that way. Her cheeks flushed at the thought that they now shared a secret, something only the two of them knew. Meanwhile, Haruto stood at the sink, quietly washing his hands, when his phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Rin. She apologized for how overly curious her friends had been and told him not to let it bother him. Smiling to himself, he realized how long it had been since life had felt so full of warmth and energy. But then, he tightened his fist, recalling the days when he believed this kind of happiness would never return. Memories surged, of his parents and little sister sharing meals with him, laughing together. And in that moment, he felt it clearly. The future wasn't fixed. It could still change. Suddenly, he was startled as his future self, still in the form of the teddy bear, appeared behind him calling his name. Haruto asked what was going on and reminded it they'd be going home soon, so it should keep quiet for now. But the plushy-voiced future self responded with urgency, saying this was an emergency. The moment had finally arrived. Haruto looked at it, confused, and asked what it was talking about. His future self said it was time to reveal the true reason for its presence. That Ria, his younger sister, who was believed to be dead, was still alive. The words stunned Haruto. He tried to explain. Ria had died years ago in an accident. He'd accepted that. But the plushie insisted that was true only in this timeline, and that they needed to prepare immediately. It was time to go save her. Haruto's thoughts drifted to a distant memory. Ria beaming with excitement, showing him the red scarf she'd made. He had told her it looked warm and asked if she had really made it herself. Proudly, she'd nodded, saying yes. She'd done it all on her own. He smiled and told her he understood, which made her giggle. Then, to his surprise, she handed him the scarf saying it was for him. He hesitated, unsure if it would suit him. Her expression dimmed as she asked if he didn't want it, even after all the effort she'd put in. He quickly assured her that wasn't it. Of course he wanted it. Her eyes lit up again, and she cheerfully wrapped the scarf around his neck, teasing that he should have just accepted it without question. As he looked down at the scarf, she commented that the stitching might be a little loose. After adjusting it, she mentioned that tomorrow was Christmas, and that the scarf was a gift from her classmate Ryota. He nodded and thanked her warmly. Sitting beside him, Ria said they should have a slightly late Christmas party after her ballet recital, and made him promise. She also added that she had another surprise gift waiting for him. But that promise was one he would never get to keep. The next morning, the plane carrying Ria and their parents crashed. They never came home. Haruto snapped back to the present, startled as his future self called out again, asking if he was paying attention. He stood in silence for a moment, his eyes settling on the cabinet in front of him, where a family photo stood beside the red scarf Ria had once gifted him. Snapping out of his thoughts, he apologized to his future self for spacing out and asked him to repeat what he'd said. The plushy version of his future self urged him to focus. He was about to embark on a mission where failure simply wasn't an option. Haruto nodded, but asked the question that had been burning inside him. How was Ria, his sister, even alive, when the crash had claimed everyone on board? There shouldn't have been any survivors. His future self asked him what exactly he'd heard about the accident. Haruto responded, confused, that it was reported as a mysterious mid-air disintegration at high altitude. His future self explained that's how it must have looked to those on the ground. But the true cause was far beyond modern science. Haruto stared in disbelief, asking what he meant. The plushie explained that on the day of the crash, a space-time rift had spontaneously opened in the sky. It was a tear in reality, a passageway to another dimension. Even in the future, no one could predict where or when one would appear. The rift had started warping gravity the moment it appeared, and the unfortunate plane carrying his family had flown too close. The gravitational chaos made it impossible to control the aircraft, which soon crashed. Haruto still couldn't grasp it. Even if the cause was supernatural, the fact remained that everyone had died. But his future self clarified that while there were no known survivors, Ria's body was never recovered. That's because she was the only one pulled into the rift, into a different dimension, leaving Haruto utterly stunned. The plushie continued. The place Ria had been pulled into was called the dimensional gap, where time and space don't behave as they do in their world. So even though many years had passed for Haruto, to Ria, the time might have felt like only a brief moment. And when the space-time rift reopened, she would return. Haruto was overwhelmed, struggling to believe it. Yet his future self reminded him that this was exactly why he had come back. To train him, to prepare him. In the future, by the time he'd figured out where the rift would open, it had already been too late. That's why this Haruto had to be the one to save her. His future self, filled with emotion, pleaded with him to save Ria. Haruto was taken aback. He rose to his feet and answered resolutely that he understood, then asked where the rift would appear. The plushie replied, it would manifest above Tokyo Tower, high above the top floor of the Sky Castle dungeon. The next morning, Haruto stood on a rooftop with a view of Tokyo Tower, ready. His future self remarked in disbelief that Haruto had cleaned out the adventurer's shop of all offensive items and healing potions. Haruto chuckled and credited the absurd amount of money he earned from leveling up in the Crystal Labyrinth. Noticing Haruto was wearing a scarf in the middle of June, his future self commented on it. Haruto simply replied that he was sensitive to the cold, and his future self decided not to press further. The plushie then pointed out that the gate to the Sky Castle dungeon was located on the observation deck of Tokyo Tower. In exactly 24 hours, a space-time rift would open 300 meters above the top floor of the Sky Castle dungeon, and Ria would be ejected from it. But if Haruto wasn't there to catch her, she would fall to her death. Haruto nodded grimly, clenched his fists, and pulled the space-time aid rope from his inventory. Looking to his future self, he swore with unwavering resolve that he would definitely save Ria. He made his way to Tokyo Tower, only to be intercepted by security shouting at him to stop. They warned that a dungeon gate had manifested on the observation deck and only adventurers ranked A or higher were allowed entry. Ignoring their protests, Haruto walked past them, prompting his future self to ask what he intended to do. Haruto simply replied that they didn't have time to waste, so they'd take the shortcut. Activating his quick body skill, Haruto sprinted up the metal structure of the tower, scaling it at blinding speed. As he clung to the tower, his future self commented that Haruto was starting to pick up on his methods. Haruto replied dryly that he was being annoying. He leapt toward the observation deck and carefully peered inside, spotting a group of soldiers and an adventurer named Kirigan. His future self immediately warned that Kirigan was a difficult person to deal with. Haruto asked if he knew the man. His future self explained that Kirigan should be the chief of the Minato branch of the Adventurers Guild at this point in time, known for being stubborn, rigid, and overly earnest. He also added that Kirigan wasn't likely to go in immediately. He'd probably wait and observe before taking any action. But they couldn't afford to wait. They needed to slip past him and move quickly through the gate. Haruto drew his sword, letting it scrape intentionally and cause a loud metallic crash that startled the soldiers and Kirigan. Kirigan ordered one of the soldiers to investigate the noise. The soldiers scanned the area but found nothing unusual. There was no broken window in sight. Suddenly, Haruto appeared behind him and delivered a sharp strike to the back of the soldier's neck, knocking him out cold in a single move. Using material ruin, Haruto restored the window he had broken to enter, erasing all signs of his infiltration. Moments later, the dazed soldier rushed back to report to Kirigan that they had a situation. Kirigan asked what was wrong, and the soldier explained that he encountered an intruder far too powerful for him to handle, which shocked Kirigan. Kirigan immediately decided to deal with the matter himself, commanding his team to move out with him. As Kirigan and his troops stormed off, the reporting soldier stayed behind. Once the coast was clear, the soldier removed his helmet, revealing himself to be Haruto. His future self praised him for pulling off the disguise and strategy flawlessly. Haruto approached the glowing entrance of the dungeon and told his future self that it was time. His future self nodded in agreement, and together they stepped into the dungeon. Once inside, Haruto was taken aback to see the world flipped upside down. He quickly realized that descending the dungeon stairs was actually taking them higher and higher, making sense of why a dungeon in the sky was still called a dungeon. His future self explained that the dungeon's theme was occult, and warned that they'd be facing hordes of undead and ghost-like monsters. Haruto remarked on the strange irony of fighting the undead under a bright blue sky, and admitted that this surreal battlefield didn't suit his swordsman style at all. But his future self reminded him that they had already accounted for this. He asked Haruto to recall what elemental power they had infused his blade with during synthesis. Haruto's eyes widened as he remembered. It was imbued with the power of light. His future self asked if he hadn't already mentioned it, then clarified that this was the real reason he had been guiding him all along. He urged Haruto to keep moving forward. Haruto dashed toward the dungeon door, but froze in surprise when a mysterious figure suddenly appeared before them. Without hesitation, he slashed at the figure with his sword and continued pressing forward. His future self explained that in the timeline he came from, the Sky Castle dungeon had vanished soon after it was discovered. No one had explored it. However, while Haruto was busy clearing enemies, he had been collecting what little intel he could. According to his findings, the dungeon was made up of 100 floors, with a powerful, unavoidable boss awaiting every 20th floor. Haruto quickly calculated that meant 5 bosses in total. He checked his phone for the time. Only 20 hours remained. He couldn't afford to waste a second on minor enemies. Just then, he stopped dead in his tracks as countless monsters began emerging from the floor. Thousands of them surged forward like a flood, aiming to overwhelm him. Frustrated, he gritted his teeth and prepared for battle. Surrounded with no room to escape, he summoned Cerberus, the sacred beast who immediately appeared and decimated the closest wave of monsters. Haruto told Cerberus there was no time. They had to break through the horde as fast as possible. On the 5th floor of the Sky Castle, monsters charged at them relentlessly, but Haruto rode atop Cerberus, slicing through enemies while the beast trampled and burned a path forward. As they surged ahead, Haruto noticed how swiftly they were progressing. His future self pointed out that, true to its name, Cerberus was a sacred beast, and that its holy attribute made it particularly effective against undead and corrupted foes. Haruto ordered Cerberus to keep charging forward. They blitzed past the 6th floor, then the 7th, 8th, 9th, and finally arrived at the 20th floor, where the first major boss awaited. Without warning, Cerberus came to a halt. Surprised, Haruto asked what was wrong, but then he heard something above. A swirling portal of smoke formed high in the air. Haruto leapt from Cerberus's back as his future self explained that this was the first of the 5-floor bosses, and that victory was the only way to unlock the path upward. From the portal descended horses, black as night, pulling an ornate carriage. A figure guided the reins as the carriage glided down from the sky. It landed with eerie grace, and from within, 3 figures emerged, each clad in noble attire tainted with darkness. Haruto immediately recognized them: the fallen noble family, the son, the lady, and the master. They bowed with elegance and hostility. Haruto noted instantly they were S-rank undead. He forced himself to remain calm. If he couldn't defeat them, then he had no hope of saving Ria. His future self yelled out a warning. They were charging. Haruto saw the trio dash toward him with frightening speed. He told his future self to back away, prompting him to ask, "Are you going to use that item you bought from the guild shop?" Haruto confirmed with a nod, and his future self leapt off his shoulder immediately. Activating his Eye of Time, Haruto's vision shifted. He could now see the threads of time, glimpsing possible movements before they happened. He drew a set of orichalcum knives from his inventory and hurled them at the noble son. The son didn't even flinch and swung his sword in retaliation, but Haruto ducked under the blade just in time. With momentum on his side, Haruto darted toward the noble lady, controlling his knives in midair like extensions of his will. She reached out to grab him, but he was faster. His blade flashed, cutting her before she could lay a hand on him. Haruto reacted instantly, spinning around to hurl one of his orichalcum knives at the noble monster closing in from behind. The blade struck true, embedding itself in the chest of the noble master. But the master surged forward with a spear, striking Haruto hard. He crossed his arms in defense and braced for impact. The blow sent him sliding back, but he managed to plant his hand on the ground, halting his momentum. Breathing heavily, he was relieved. His preparation had worked, and he'd created the distance he needed. Raising his hand toward the 3 nobles, he clenched his fist. The knives embedded in their bodies lit up, bursting with radiant energy before exploding, engulfing the fallen nobles in a brilliant blast. His future self reminded him that each orichalcum blade was crafted from the rarest metals in the dungeons, ultra-luxury weapons worth over 100,000 credits apiece, and that they detonated upon contact with electricity. He added wryly that Haruto sure was throwing around fortunes like confetti. "Isn't it a bit excessive to throw millions of credits just to win a fight?" his future self asked. Haruto shook his head. "It's not over yet. I only destroyed their bodies." As he spoke, ghostly forms emerged. The nobles had returned as vengeful spirits. Haruto suspected ghost types couldn't be harmed easily by physical weapons. But now that they were ethereal, their weaknesses were exposed. Drawing his light-imbued sword, he launched into the air and aimed his blade at the phantom nobles. Using his skill Chaos Meteor, he unleashed a flurry of high-speed slashes, each strike charged with divine light. The spirits howled and disintegrated into ash under the assault. A system message confirmed their defeat. He leveled up 5 times, gained 8 points in swordsmanship, and received 2,210 credits. The stairway to the next floor opened, and he walked toward it, whispering, "Wait for me, Ria. Your big brother's on his way." Hours later, on the 40th floor, the second boss awaited. Cerberus lunged with all its might, jaws wide, and sank its teeth into the neck of the undead queen Lamia. With a final shriek, Lamia collapsed, defeated. Cerberus turned back and approached Haruto. Haruto patted its head, and the sacred beast wagged its tails enthusiastically like an overgrown puppy. "Good job," he said with a smile. His future self chuckled and commented, "Cerberus acts more like a pet than a divine beast." Only 3 bosses remained. On the 50th floor, as they advanced, his future self suddenly shouted, "Stop!" Cerberus halted immediately. Haruto turned and asked what was wrong. "No mistake," his future self said. "Activate the Eye of Time and look at that wall." Haruto did as instructed. To his surprise, the Eye of Time revealed a hidden chamber concealed behind the stone wall. His future self leapt from his shoulder. "In my timeline, no one ever explored this place, but now, you're about to conquer it." Transforming into an envelope once again, he told Haruto, "Insert me into the gap like last time." Haruto followed the instructions, sliding the envelope into a narrow crevice. The wall responded instantly, splitting apart to reveal a hidden entrance. Haruto told Cerberus to wait outside, and the beast obediently sat by the door. Stepping inside, they were met with a dazzling sight. A massive crystal stood in the center of the hidden room, pulsating with strange energy. Haruto eyed the glowing crystal warily and asked his future self if this was going to be another trick. "Not this time," his future self replied earnestly. The system displayed the crystal's name, Akashic Crystal, a relic capable of unlocking hidden or dormant powers within the one who touched it. Haruto placed his hand on it, and the crystal shattered in a burst of radiant fragments. A wave of information surged through him. He had acquired space-time magic, the devastating skill Gravity Bomb, and a new ability called Avatar Replay. In addition, his quick body skill rose to level 3, and Stop Chain increased to level. He also unlocked potential unleashing LV 3, granting him a massive plus 75% power boost. "So this Avatar Replay, what exactly does it do?" Haruto asked. His future self grinned. "You'll understand better in a real battle." Haruto rolled his eyes. "Of course you'd say that." Later they reached the 60th floor where the third boss awaited. A grotesque figure emerged. Zombie Beelzebub, the so-called Lord of the Flies. "What's its weak point?" Haruto asked. "Well," his future self replied, "it flies, spits acid that melts armor, regenerates quickly. Oh, and it smells terrible." "You're just listing random traits now," Haruto muttered. But before they could plan further, Beelzebub lunged at him with shocking speed. Haruto barely dodged, but still felt the sting of its sharp, horn-like nose. The monster paused, thinking it had skewered him, only for Haruto to vanish in a blink, stunning it. Beelzebub turned, confused, as his future self called out, "Did you just use it in actual combat?" Without answering, Haruto sprinted toward the monster from behind. Activating Avatar Replay and throwing out a decoy plushie, he simultaneously triggered Quick Body LV. Just as Beelzebub attacked again, he used his burst of speed to dodge it cleanly. Wind trailed behind him as he circled the monster with blinding velocity. His future self explained, "Avatar Replay creates a clone from your immediate past. To enemies, it's like you're multiplying." The illusion worked perfectly. Beelzebub saw multiple Harutos attacking at once. Haruto charged in, sword drawn, the clones from Avatar Replay surrounding Beelzebub like a swarm. He activated Chaos Meteor Sword, closing the distance. Beelzebub retaliated by spewing a wave of toxic acid. The venom cloud engulfed Haruto, or so it seemed, until he burst through the mist and sliced the monster apart with a flurry of strikes, ensuring it couldn't regenerate. Beelzebub let out a shriek before its body disintegrated into dust. "You're basically a ninja master now," his future self joked. "Stop," Haruto shot back. "That's way off character." The stairway to the next level appeared. "2 bosses left," he said with resolve. But as he approached the stairs, a sharp pain pierced his head. He dropped to his knees, clutching his skull, then collapsed. His future self shouted his name in panic. 3 years ago. Haruto sat deep in thought, lost in his own world, while Ria tugged at his sleeve with puppy eyes. Despite her best efforts, he remained silent, mulling something over. I promise I'll work hard. I won't give up halfway, she pleaded. Please, pretty please. With a long sigh, he gave in. You really want to take ballet classes that badly? Her eyes sparkled. Yes, he chuckled and said, Fine, pick your favorite ballet shoes and show them to me. Her happiness was instant. She began to hum a cheerful tune as she flipped through a ballet brochure, completely absorbed. He smiled quietly, watching his little sister's joy, her laughter lighting up the room. The next day at the ballet school, the studio buzzed with chatter as students stretched and warmed up, until Ria arrived. Thanks for waiting, she beamed at him. I'm ready. Her friends greeted her excitedly, saying how happy they were to take lessons together and that they'd all do their best. Ria turned back to wave at her brother, and he waved back with a warm grin. One of the girls nudged Ria playfully, teasing, You've got such a brother complex. It smells like spring around you two. Isn't it nice having your brother chaperone you everywhere? Ria's face turned red. Well, what are you even imagining? The lesson began, and Haruto watched from the back of the room as the girls moved in unison. Ria followed the instructor closely, extending her arms gracefully, raising one foot, then twirling on her toes with joy and confidence. He smiled again, moved by how happy she looked. After the class, Ria waved goodbye to her friends, then walked home with her brother. Ballet is so fun, she said, but it's really hard too. I get it, he replied, but that's good. Ria looked at him for a long moment before stopping in her tracks. Haruto, he tilted his head. What is it? Are the lessons and shoes expensive? He shook his head. Not at all. You don't need to worry about that. Ria lowered her eyes. But with Mom and Dad overseas for that academic conference, you paid for it yourself, didn't you? She asked gently. Her words caught him off guard. He hadn't expected her to notice. It's really fine, he said softly. I wanted to. Were you happy watching me today? She asked. He nodded. I was glad, he said. You found something you truly enjoy. That's all I ever wanted for you. Ria hugged her lunchbox tightly, smiling. Thank you, Oni-chan. Her gratitude filled him with warmth. Then she tugged his arm and declared, I love you. Hey, careful, don't pull like that. But she giggled. It's fine. We'll always be like this. And I've decided I'm going to cook a real meal for you to show how much I love you. Haruto's eyes snapped open. He was lying on top of Cerberus. You're finally awake, his future self said, visibly relieved. Did I pass out? Haruto asked. Yeah, came the answer. You overused your stamina. I've got a top-grade potion from the guild shop. If I drink it, I already gave it to you, his future self interrupted. Your physical injuries are healed, but that won't fix the mental fatigue. Haruto's eyes widened. Wait, what about the time limit? Only 5 hours left, his future self said grimly. Haruto forced himself upright, eyes burning with determination. Let's go, he said. I promised Ria I'd take her to ballet again. His future self remained silent, watching him walk steadily toward the next staircase. He knew there was just one intermediate boss left, and then the final floor. But he also knew Haruto was nearing his limit. If things continued like this, he wouldn't survive. There was only one option left, his last resort. Moments later, they reached the 80th floor, where their fourth challenge awaited. The monstrous Acid King Mummy. With a blast of his space-time magic, Gravity Beam, he crushed the Acid King Mummy, slamming it violently into the dungeon floor. As a result, he gained 2 level-ups, and his swordsman skill increased by 4 ranks. The system also rewarded him with 3,561,110 credits. Breathing heavily, he slumped in exhaustion, until Cerberus appeared behind him, trying to lift his spirits. He chuckled and thanked his loyal companion. The system prompted, Would you like to use an elixir? Yes, he answered. His health was fully restored, but the pain in his head remained, a lingering symptom of deep mental fatigue. Want a rest? His future self asked. No, he replied firmly. There were only 3 hours left until Ria would emerge from the space-time home. There was no time to waste. He walked toward the staircase leading upward. Let's head to the top floor, he said. After an arduous climb, they reached the 100th floor of the Sky Castle dungeon. We've finally reached space, he said. His future self nodded. And now, it's time to face the final boss. He explained that after defeating the boss, the space-time hole would open in the exact location they stood. Clenching his fist, Haruto nodded. Then let's finish this. He stepped into the final chamber and saw the god of the underworld, the Soul Reaper, seated on a blackened throne. Its piercing red eyes locked onto them. That thing it's not in the database, his future self murmured, unsettled. The Soul Reaper stood slowly. You're human, and alone, it said, its voice deep and smooth. Haruto was stunned. It was intelligent, fully capable of speech and comprehension. Impressive, the Soul Reaper continued. For a member of the lowly human race, known only for swarming enemies in groups, to make it this far solo, commendable. The Soul Reaper grabbed its weapon. Haruto drew his sword in response. They stood opposite each other, two forces on the verge of collision. I am the god of the underworld, it declared. Let us begin. I shall grant you the deadliest curse known to existence. Haruto's future self leapt off his shoulder. That weapon, he said, is in the database. It's called the Curse-Commanding Divine Scythe, a staff-class weapon for high-level illusion magic. It inflicts permanent psychic debuffs and status abnormalities. In short, it's extremely dangerous. Doesn't matter, Haruto said, eyes locked on the target. I'll crush it right here. Activating Flow of Time, he identified a weakness in the Soul Reaper's defenses. With Quick Body Level 3 engaged, he shot forward like lightning, catching the Soul Reaper off guard with his sudden burst of speed. The Soul Reaper swung its scythe, but Haruto twisted in midair, evading the blow as it slashed in a wide arc. Pulling out a dagger, he hurled it directly at the Reaper's weak point, but the Soul Reaper parried it mid-flight with its scythe. In the blink of an eye, it vanished, then reappeared right in front of him, scythe raised. It struck, but only hit a fading afterimage. Too late, it realized the deception. Haruto was already behind it, activating Stop Chain. Chains erupted and coiled around the Soul Reaper, binding it tightly as Haruto surged in to deliver the finishing blow. The Soul Reaper sneered. A curse like that won't work on a god. Haruto's eyes widened in shock as the chains began to dissolve. Freed with ease, the Soul Reaper swung its scythe at blinding speed, the blade racing toward Haruto's neck. His future self shouted his name in panic, but just in time, Haruto ducked low, narrowly avoiding the deadly arc. Pressing his hand against the ground, he regained his balance and leapt back to widen the distance. You're quick, the Soul Reaper remarked, amused. Dodging a divine scythe twice, not bad. Then, with a condescending smile, it added, but you're still a wingless worm, bound to crawl on the earth. Raising its weapon, the Soul Reaper cast Curse Dimension, declaring it would shatter his legs first. An overwhelming aura pressed down on him, and suddenly, the entire floor flipped. The Soul Reaper stood inverted above him. Not again, Haruto shouted, confused. Am I upside down? The Soul Reaper offered a sinister smile, and then the ground beneath him began to crumble. He plummeted, panic rising. It had taken everything just to reach the 100th floor, and now he was falling. The Soul Reaper slashed downward. You won't be able to flail around forever, human. Haruto, panicked, quickly hurled a knife mid-fall, muttering, sometimes you've got to break a few eggs to make an omelet. The blade exploded, disrupting the Soul Reaper's swing. The blast slammed Haruto into a wall, but it was solid. Acting fast, he plunged his sword into the wall and held on, halting his fall. The Soul Reaper floated ominously above, still amused. Haruto quickly reasoned. The falling sensation and disorientation had to be illusion magic, the Soul Reaper's specialty. He must have been caught in its spell the moment their eyes met. But how to break it? He looked up again, only to find the Soul Reaper now right in front of him. It opened its mouth and spat a dark projectile at him. He dodged, but not fully. His leg was struck, and the curse rapidly spread. You'll make an excellent test subject, the Soul Reaper gloated. Let the grudges of the dead feast on your flesh. Will it be your own people's hatred or my scythe that ends you first? It mocked. Haruto saw the cursed smoke crawling up his body. He had to escape this twisted space, fast. His mind raced, searching for a solution. Raising its scythe again, the Soul Reaper smiled darkly. Goodbye, human. As the blade fell, Haruto clenched his teeth in dread. Is this really how it ends? Just then, he heard Ria's voice calling to him. He closed his eyes, bracing himself as the scythe descended. Suddenly, a voice shouted, Stop chain, level 78. Chains erupted, binding the Soul Reaper mid-swing. It froze, startled. Haruto looked up in disbelief. You! His future self hovered beside him. This is my last resort. The plushie on his future self's shoulder began to glow, bright and unstable, as if ready to detonate. Haruto stared, eyes wide, as his future self's body began to transform. but the radiance was overwhelming, forcing him to shield his eyes with his arm. A sudden explosion rang out, and Haruto watched in shock as a figure materialized from the light. It was his future self, now revealed in his true, fully awakened form. "It'd be troublesome if you died here," his future self said calmly. Then, activating the All Things Rewind skill, he caused time itself to reverse before Haruto's eyes. Haruto felt himself rise, lifted by unseen force as his sword dislodged from the stone wall and returned to him. As he floated back up to the battlefield, the shattered ground beneath him began to reform, until the once ruined terrain was completely restored to its original state. The Soul Reaper stood frozen, clearly stunned that Haruto had emerged unscathed. "Did you just undo a ghost spell?" it asked, perplexed. Haruto's future self landed firmly in front of him, prompting surprise. But all he said was, "It's been a while since I looked like this." The Soul Reaper scoffed in rage. "What good will one more pitiful human do?" This was only the prelude. It then unleashed an enormous surge of dark energy, magic forged from centuries of underworld research. Twisted heads and hands clawed their way out of the darkness, as a legion of demon angels was summoned. "I, God of the underworld, shall judge you sinful humans," it declared. But Haruto's future self remained calm, noting that this being could even generate A-rank monsters. "Get up," he told Haruto. "I'll handle the small fry. You focus on the boss." Haruto hesitated, overwhelmed by the Soul Reaper's divine power. But his future self reassured him, confident in his mastery over space-time magic. "We're the same after all," he added. "That's why we'll win." Bolstered by those words, Haruto stood tall and moved to his side, silently signaling his resolve. "Here's the plan," his future self whispered. The details shocked him. The Soul Reaper noticed the exchange and sneered, commanding its army to rip them to pieces. The horde responded instantly, charging at them with their jagged scythes raised. Haruto and his future self split in opposite directions, evading with lightning speed. The majority of the demons pursued his future self. Once they were in range, his future self activated gravity territory, halting the monsters in place. Then, he released a barrage of circular space magic, disintegrating the creatures instantly. "I'm your opponent!" he shouted, taunting the survivors. Meanwhile, Haruto charged toward the Soul Reaper, pursued by a few lesser demons. But before they could catch up, his future self erased them with a flick of magic. He then cast Sped Up Field, accelerating Haruto's movements and propelling him forward. "You filthy worm!" the Soul Reaper hissed. "You don't belong in my world." Haruto's answer was simple. "Die!" The Soul Reaper tried to stop him with Curse Dimension again, but Haruto kept pushing forward, eyes burning. "I've already seen through that trick." Haruto effortlessly shattered the Cursed Dimension, stunning the Soul Reaper. As he approached, the enraged creature mocked him as an insolent inferior and released a thick cloud of smoke. Realizing that roundabout tactics were futile, Haruto resolved to attack head-on. He deflected a side strike with his blade, aiming straight for the creature's heart, its presumed weak spot. A brutal duel followed, filled with rapid strikes and counters. Haruto unleashed his Chaos Meteor skill, managing to pierce the creature, prompting a pained sigh. Screeching in agony, the Soul Reaper warned Haruto not to become overconfident. It retaliated with its curse-edged technique, launching 3 simultaneous slashes that caught Haruto off guard. He was struck, bleeding heavily and coughing up blood. Quickly, he activated his Avatar Replay ability. This summoned a past version of himself to absorb part of the damage. Enduring the pain, he charged again, taking the Soul Reaper by surprise. With his remaining strength, he plunged his sword into what he thought was the creature's heart. The Soul Reaper howled, and Haruto believed victory was his. But then, the creature smiled sinisterly, sending a chill through him. He saw it had no heart. Before he could react, it slashed him in two. His future self called out in panic. The Soul Reaper laughed, mocking them for believing its heart was a vulnerability. It revealed one of its divine traits, weak point counterfeiting, a deceitful ability of the underworld gods. As Haruto's body collapsed, the Soul Reaper cackled and ordered its minions to advance. It mocked Haruto's future self, declaring he was the last one standing. The future Haruto, stunned, cried out in disbelief, questioning what the real weak point could be. The Soul Reaper roared that a god had no weaknesses. If it did, it would be something conceptual, like the Forbidden Crown of Hades. It commanded its minions to strike, stating it would show no mercy. But Haruto's future self calmly responded, saying they had just heard the clue. They now knew the truth. Suddenly, Haruto reappeared behind the Soul Reaper, blade poised at its head, confirming he understood. The Soul Reaper, shocked, shouted in disbelief. It had just cleaved him in two. Haruto revealed that the one it had cut was merely a replica. At the moment the creature struck, he had used Avatar Replay to send a duplicate charging ahead. Meanwhile, the real Haruto had been lying motionless on the ground. The Soul Reaper, still reeling, yelled that Haruto should have died from its divine blow. Haruto admitted the strike was indeed fatal, but his future self had used the rollback space-time skill on him. Just before death, time was reversed on Haruto. His future self clarified that the spell was highly complex and could only be used once per target. But fortunately, their plan had worked flawlessly. The Soul Reaper lunged at Haruto, but his future self used Stop Chain level 78 to immobilize it. He then asked if Shelby had already prepared the final stage. Haruto turned to the Soul Reaper, confirming its own earlier statement, that its weak point was the crown above its head. His future self joined in, declaring they would annihilate it completely, just as Eri had once shattered it. Haruto took a deep breath, recalling his little sister's final words of love and gratitude. That memory reignited his spirit. Empowered by resolve, he gathered all his strength. With a single mighty slash, he beheaded the Soul Reaper. Then, in a blur of motion, he leapt into the air and crushed its skull into fragments. The Soul Reaper's form vanished, its body collapsing in defeat. As it perished, its summoned monsters disappeared as well. Haruto landed, and a system notification appeared. You have defeated the god of the underworld, Soul Reaper. He received 120,000 experience points and 35 million credits. Turning to his future self, Haruto reported that the extermination was complete. At that moment, a staircase materialized, leading to the top floor. His future self said it was finally time to go. Haruto nodded and stepped toward him. Glancing at his older self with curiosity, Haruto asked if that's really what he'd look like one day. The older Haruto replied playfully, "Say that again and I'll smack you." Laughing, Haruto clarified. He just meant things would have been easier if his future self had shown up sooner. As they climbed the staircase, his older self reminded him that his intervention was meant to be a last resort, and that there was more to all this than Haruto realized. But he cut the explanation short, warning that there wasn't much time left before the space-time rift opened. Gripping Haruto's hand tightly, he urged him to move quickly. They reached the top floor of the Sky Castle dungeon, enveloped in dense fog. His future self looked up suddenly and shouted. It was there. Both gazed skyward as cracks split open the sky, surging with raw energy. At the center of the chaos floated a small girl. It was their sister, Rhea. His future self said the space-time rift would remain connected to that world for exactly 9 minutes and 48 seconds. Enough time, if used wisely. As he began floating toward the rift, he suddenly recalled something and activated the speed-up field skill, generating circles of accelerating energy around him. Haruto called after him, and the two surged upward together. As they neared the rift, Haruto cried out to Rhea. She slowly opened her eyes and saw him. Haruto reached out, shouting that he was right there. But his future self cautioned him to stay calm. The rift's interior was cut off from normal causality. Only space-time magic would work inside. He entered the rift, saying he'd use space-time magic to push Rhea out, and Haruto should be ready to catch her. Positioning himself behind Rhea, he focused all his magic into his hands. With tremendous effort, he unleashed a surge of power to propel her out. As Rhea drifted toward the edge of the rift, Haruto, his vision blurring, strained to reach her. As Rhea emerged, she called out to him, "Big brother!" But to Haruto's horror, the space-time rift began to close prematurely. Alarmed, he shouted to his future self, demanding to know what was happening. His future self, equally stunned, replied that the rift wasn't supposed to collapse this soon. Panic set in as the hole rapidly shrank, threatening to trap Rhea inside. Desperately, his future self poured every last bit of power into keeping the rift open, yelling for Haruto to pull her out quickly. Haruto responded with resolve, using his space-time magic to draw Rhea toward him. She edged closer while his future self struggled to hold the rift open. He reminded Haruto that if any part of Rhea was caught in the closing rift, she'd be torn apart. And even if she made it out, a fall from that height could kill her. Haruto, laser-focused, assured him he understood. As Rhea finally cleared the rift and started to fall, she reached out. Haruto did the same. He caught her hand and pulled her safely into his arms. Then he shouted for his future self to escape too, but there was no reply. Confused, Haruto called again, urging him to hurry. His future self, smiling gently, said it was time to say goodbye. Haruto, stunned, asked what he meant. He explained he'd reached his limit. He'd used up all the Chronos factors sustaining his form and could no longer return to his timeline. Haruto tried to speak, but his older self interrupted, his tone serious. He reflected on his own failures, being a poor disciple, making foolish mistakes, and letting emotions cloud his growth. But in spite of everything, he had no regrets fighting beside Haruto, because Haruto's heart was genuinely kind. He added that the rift would never open again. This was their final farewell. Haruto, devastated, cried out in denial, begging him not to go. His future self placed his hopes on Haruto now, entrusting him with the mission to save their world. Clenching his fists and fighting back tears, Haruto solemnly accepted the responsibility. His future self smiled faintly, reminding him that it was a promise. Then, turning to Ria, he called her young lady and assured her she was safe now. Ria softly asked if he might be her brother too. The question touched him, bringing back memories of her warmth and sweetness. With a gentle smile, he welcomed her home. As the space-time rift finally closed, Haruto's future self vanished with it. When it was gone, Haruto clutched his chest in anguish and cried out, mourning the loss of someone irreplaceable. That moment marked both his greatest victory and deepest sorrow. The next day, after completing the Tokyo Tower Sky Castle dungeon, Haruto entered his classroom at the Adventure Cultivation Agency's high school division. He was stunned when the girls in the room rushed over, excitedly saying they'd been waiting for him. To his surprise, even third-year seniors had shown up. One girl stepped forward and, speaking on behalf of the Ruby Victims Association, thanked him deeply, joined by all the others in heartfelt gratitude. The girls began voicing their relief that the detestable predator had finally been defeated. No longer haunted by tears each night, one girl pointed to Haruto, calling him their savior and scoffing at whoever had dubbed him the god of plagues. Embarrassed and stammering, Haruto asked them to stop, internally wishing for a quiet, peaceful life. Just then, someone walked up to him. He was surprised to see it was Yuzuki. She bowed respectfully, apologizing on behalf of the student council for the previous incident with the president. Haruto assured her it wasn't her fault and there was no need for her to apologize. But Yuzuki insisted she couldn't let it go, especially now that she was about to become the new student council president. Looking him straight in the eye, she asked if he'd consider helping the school from within, leaving Haruto confused. She explained that she was recruiting for the student council and wanted him to act as the leader of the security team. The class buzzed with excitement at the proposal, but Haruto politely declined, saying he was fine the way he was, surprising Yuzuki. Desperate, she grabbed his hand and pleaded, claiming she'd do anything if he accepted. Rin was stunned, unable to believe Yuzuki was being so forward with Haruto, calling his name in disbelief. Akane tried to calm Rin down, saying it would be okay. Another girl reminded Yuzuki that class was about to start and gently pulled her away from Haruto. As she left, Yuzuki shouted that they'd resume the conversation during lunch, commanding him to stay put in class under her new authority. Haruto sighed and scratched his head, already feeling overwhelmed. During lunch, Haruto relaxed on the rooftop, sitting on a bench and checking his system stats. He noted that he was now level 98, ranked C, with a system recommendation to advance to rank A. His swordsmanship was level 64, time magic at level 82, and his overall stats were high. He discovered 5 new spells and felt nearly unbeatable with such a build. Given all he had been through, it made sense he'd grown this strong. He was also stunned to find he had 43 million credits, an absurd amount for a high school student. While enjoying a burger, he heard footsteps rushing toward the rooftop. Yuzuki stormed in, calling out for him as the girls frantically searched the area but couldn't locate him. Frustrated, Yuzuki reminded everyone that she had told him to stay in the classroom. They decided to check the gym and left, unaware that Haruto had been quietly eating on the rooftop the entire time. After they were gone, he jumped down, realizing he needed a strategy to deal with these kinds of chaotic situations. Turning to the bench instinctively, he meant to ask his future self for advice. But when he looked, he was struck by the empty space. His future self was gone. The reality of his future self's absence washed over Haruto once again, stirring a quiet ache in his heart. After classes ended, he returned to his apartment carrying a bag of groceries. Climbing the stairs, he entered the door code and stepped inside. The moment he opened the door, a familiar voice greeted him with mock impatience. Ria teasingly scolded him for being late and keeping her waiting. She beamed at him and said, "Welcome home," to which he smiled and responded warmly, "Your big brother is home." With excitement, Ria showed off the dinner she had made, proudly calling it a home-cooked meal from his adorable little sister, leaving Haruto both touched and impressed. She then noticed the convenience store bag in his hand and asked about it. He looked down at it, realizing he had grabbed it out of habit. Ria lightly scolded him for making unnecessary purchases and reminded him to be more mindful now that they were living together. He nodded, accepting the point. She emphasized that they'd have to manage their expenses carefully going forward. That part surprised him. Living together permanently was still sinking in. But he quickly agreed and promised to be more careful. She stepped closer, smiled gently, and once again welcomed him home with affection. Her words echoed deeply within him, reminding him of the moment his future self had welcomed Ria back. Smiling at the memory, he responded softly, "It's good to be home." He set the plastic bag on the table, and just then, Ria seemed to remember something. Before dinner, they stood in front of an old family photo together. They thanked their late parents for everything and asked them to keep watching over them. Haruto looked at Ria with a tender smile, grateful for this quiet, precious moment. Ria's gaze landed on a scarf she had once made for him. She was shocked to see he had kept it all this time, and he replied naturally, "Of course I did." Laughing, she pointed out that it was summer, but he joked that he still got cold easily. She knew that well. After changing out of his school uniform, they both sat at the table. Ria, glowing with pride, presented the dinner she had made. Haruto thanked her and took a bite. Eagerly, she asked if he liked it. He smiled and told her it was absolutely delicious. Still in disbelief, Ria asked if she was truly back home. Haruto reassured her with a heartfelt, "You're really home." He also shared that he had already notified the authorities, submitting the paperwork to confirm that she was alive and well. Ria thanked him and reflected on the time she had lost, saying she needed to catch up, especially in school. Haruto reminded her that this included her beloved dance academy. Concerned, she asked whether it would be financially feasible, but he told her not to worry, now or ever again. With a teasing smile, he added that even if she became a grandma, she could still go to that academy. Laughing, Ria playfully asked what he meant by that. She then looked over at a teddy bear and asked if they owed everything to his future self. Haruto agreed. They had a great deal to thank him for. In that quiet moment, Haruto remembered the burden his future self had entrusted to him, the mission to save the world. Haruto found himself staring at the teddy bear, silently wondering how he was supposed to fulfill the massive task of saving the world. Just then, Ria remembered something in her pocket, an item she had with her when Haruto rescued her. She pulled out a small glowing cube and asked him if he recognized it. Haruto was startled. It was a message cube, an artifact from the future. As soon as he activated it, the cube released a radiant light. To Haruto's shock, his teddy bear was suddenly possessed, animated by the remaining will of his future self. Speaking through the bear, his future self addressed Haruto, confirming that if he was seeing this message, it meant he was truly gone. He also acknowledged that Haruto was probably confused and unsure of what to do next. But with confidence and a touch of flair, the future self assured him that, as the strongest and most peerless warrior, he had left behind exactly what Haruto would need. Then, with typical smugness, he asked Haruto to admit how amazing he was and encouraged a bit of praise. Haruto couldn't help but shake his head, thinking that even in a pre-recorded message, his future self was still shamelessly arrogant. The tone then shifted as his future self said he would send a vital letter into Haruto's system storage, one that would help him become Spacetime Mage version 2. He called Haruto a savior and urged him to make good use of it. The cube shut off as the data transferred, the important letter now safely stored in his system. A system window appeared, showing a message from his future self. It reminded Haruto not to slack off just because he was no longer there to keep him on track. Seeing the message lifted Haruto's spirits. He smiled despite everything. Ria, noticing his expression, asked if people were really calling him a savior now. She thought it sounded cool. Haruto downplayed it, saying it was just a title born from a bunch of circumstances coming together. Meanwhile, far from Haruto, a high-level meeting was taking place at the Adventurer Guild's general headquarters. On the top floor, the legendary 7 sages, the S-rank elite adventurers, had gathered. Kirigan, also known as Ion, chief of the Minato branch, addressed the group and steered them to the next urgent matter. He cited 3 serious incidents: the destruction of the Chaos Dragon at Nakano Train Yard, the unauthorized breach of the Shinjuku branch's restricted synthesis facility, and the unapproved clearing of the Tokyo Tower Sky Castle dungeon. He stressed that all 3 had occurred recently and, disturbingly, may have been committed by the same person. Identifying the culprit was now their top priority. The 5th sage, known as the King of Kings Tantalum, questioned whether the Sky Castle dungeon had truly been assessed, suggesting it might be as dangerous as an S-rank dungeon. The second sage, Platinum, the oracle deliverer, was skeptical. Could one individual really have cleared it alone? The sixth sage, Kiryu Muramasa, or the exalted magic swordsman, found the idea highly improbable. The third sage, known only as 15 Oz, remained silent and watchful. The first sage, Q, the omni-elemental, found the events intriguing, viewing them as a bold challenge to the guild's authority. The fourth sage, Siren the psycho witch, laughed darkly, curious about the twisted nature of the person behind these incidents. The final speaker, the seventh sage Tellurium, also known as Akashic Vision, announced that they had successfully locked onto an observation target. Kirigan addressed the group one last time, emphasizing that all the sages now understood the severity of the current situation. He proposed that if they could identify the mysterious adventurer responsible for recent events, they should immediately recruit them to the guild's executive team and begin preparing them as a frontline warrior for the inevitable Otherworld War. With that, he officially closed the meeting of the seven sages. The next day, on a calm and sunny street, a mother walked hand in hand with her child, both enjoying the peaceful morning. The mother became momentarily distracted by a patch of beautiful roadside flowers, while her child's attention was stolen by a vivid blue butterfly. Enthralled, the girl chased after it, unaware that she had wandered into the road. A truck suddenly appeared, the driver shouting in panic as he spotted the child directly in his path. The loud honk jolted the mother from her thoughts. She looked up, horror-stricken, as she saw her daughter standing in the truck's path. Desperately, she sprinted toward her, but it was clear she wouldn't make it in time. The child's balloons floated into the sky, seconds from a tragedy. But then, in a blink, Haruto appeared, standing calmly with the child safely in his arms. The mother froze, completely stunned by what had just occurred. Realizing her daughter was safe, she ran to them, tears of relief streaming down her face. Haruto knelt and softly asked the girl if she was scared, reassuring her that everything was okay now. After gently setting her down, the girl thanked him with a shy voice. Her mother immediately embraced her, overwhelmed with gratitude. Haruto gave a quiet smile, relieved he had managed to save her just in time. At first, he had feared he might not make it in time, but thanks to his mastery of space-time magic, he did, though he lost both his drink and the girl's balloon in the process, a small price to pay. Clenching his fist, he felt proud, glad to be using his powers to protect others. The mother tried to thank him properly, saying she'd be right back, but Haruto modestly waved her off, insisting that it wasn't necessary. She pressed him for his name, saying that a hero like him deserved recognition, but Haruto gently declined, saying he preferred to remain anonymous and avoid standing out more than he already did. Slinging his school bag over his shoulder, he told them he had to go and quickly dashed off before she could stop him. A few moments later, he arrived at the Adventurer Cultivation Agency's high school division. Haruto leapt from building to building until he quietly landed on the school rooftop. From above, he noticed the student council members searching near the entrance, asking around for him. Letting out a sigh of frustration, he headed toward his classroom. But even there, he couldn't escape the attention. His classmates stared and whispered, the weight of his growing reputation already setting in. Haruto could feel the intense stares all around him. He didn't need to activate his time flow skill to know he was being heavily watched. Meanwhile, Rin observed him quietly, sensing that he was slipping away from her grasp, just like he had that day outside the Adventurers Guild. She recalled a visit to the Shinjuku branch of the Adventurers Guild. There, she had reported the successful completion of a B-rank dungeon as a student from the Nakano District's Cultivation Academy. The clerk commended her work, but just as she was about to leave, he asked her if there was a student named Haruto at her school. Caught off guard, Rin confirmed that she did know someone by that name. The man explained that a researcher from the weapons synthesis lab named Talk had recently proposed a groundbreaking theory called the Kaiju theory. Apparently, Talk had mentioned that it was a student from Nakano, presumably Haruto, who had given him a crucial hint that inspired his theory. The clerk admitted it all sounded rather far-fetched. Rin couldn't help but stare at Haruto again, wondering just how far his influence would reach. After class, their professor reminded everyone about the upcoming arrival of an exchange student next week before dismissing them. During lunch, Haruto sat alone on the rooftop, going through more of the messages left by his future self. One particular message advised him to focus on sharpening his swordsmanship. While space-time magic was powerful, it was meant as a support tool. His true strength lay in the blade. If he wanted to become a real space-time mage like his future self, he had to first walk the path of the sword. The message concluded cryptically, suggesting Haruto would understand the reason someday. Then the projection faded. Haruto lay back on the bench, exasperated by how vague his future self always was. Why couldn't he ever explain things clearly? At that moment, an unfamiliar presence approached the school, someone powerful. The man closed the distance in moments, using high-level movement techniques like stealing steps and flash stride. Haruto suddenly felt a chill. An overwhelming presence had arrived. He turned to see a man appear on the rooftop, seemingly out of nowhere. Instantly, Haruto summoned his sword from his storage and took a battle stance, demanding to know who the man was. The figure introduced himself. Kiryu Muramasa, 6th Sage, and the legendary Exalted Magic Swordsman. He asked if Haruto was the mysterious individual making waves, and said he needed Haruto's strength. Muramasa's expression turned grim as he warned that the destruction of the world was near. Haruto was stunned. He hadn't sensed Muramasa's presence until the very moment he appeared. Whoever this man was, he wasn't ordinary. No, Muramasa was someone truly formidable, clearly on a different level. Haruto demanded to know what he meant by the destruction of the world. Was that really happening? Muramasa confirmed it without hesitation. Everything Haruto loved would soon be wiped away. The first image that flashed in Haruto's mind was of Ria, his sister. He raised his blade, saying he couldn't just take Muramasa's word for it, especially when he knew nothing about who this man really was. Haruto added that Muramasa had shown up unannounced and started spouting what sounded to him like coercive demands. It reminded him of someone else he didn't particularly like, his own future self. With conviction, Haruto declared that he would live by his own choices, guided solely by his own judgment. Muramasa smiled at his response and pulled out a photo, asking if Haruto still felt the same after seeing it. Haruto's expression darkened when he realized it was a photo of his sister practicing dance. A wave of fury surged through him, and a powerful aura erupted from his body, startling even Muramasa. This wasn't normal fighting spirit. It was something much more dangerous and unstable. Still, Muramasa could tell from that aura alone, Haruto had the makings of a true swordsman. He calmly assured Haruto that the photo had only been part of a background check. He hadn't touched his sister. Drawing his sword, Muramasa swore by his swordmaster's name that he meant no harm. Then, walking past Haruto, he added that if Haruto needed a duel to be convinced, he would gladly accept. That only pushed Haruto further. He growled that Muramasa had crossed a line. Muramasa jumped back, warning Haruto that what came next might leave regrets. The duel began. Muramasa unleashed his killing intent skill. Haruto was stunned. There was no Chronos factor surrounding Muramasa at all. That meant he couldn't see the usual flow of time to predict his opponent's movements. Muramasa noticed Haruto's hesitation and asked if something was wrong, then calmly declared, "Ready or not, I'm coming." In a flash, Muramasa vanished, then reappeared right in front of Haruto, startling him. Muramasa explained that killing intent didn't mean showing bloodlust. It meant eliminating even the faintest trace of his presence. He then swung his blade at Haruto, who barely twisted midair to avoid the slash. Haruto now understood. Muramasa's killing intent was nullifying the Chronos factor in his vicinity. He snapped, asking Muramasa why he was explaining his own abilities. Was he trying to be some cliché manga villain? Muramasa replied coolly that he could afford to give away his secrets. He'd still win. He explained that erasing his presence gave him total control of the battlefield. In a blink, Muramasa appeared behind Haruto without warning. Haruto turned just in time, but not fast enough. Muramasa's blade sliced through him. Muramasa smiled, convinced the fight was over. But then, to his shock, Haruto's form flickered and vanished. It had only been a clone, created using his avatar replay skill. The real Haruto reappeared behind him and swung down with full force. But Muramasa twisted his body just in time, barely dodging the strike. He gritted his teeth. What was this technique? Haruto, frustrated by the miss, prepared to press his advantage. Muramasa leapt back, widening the distance between them. Still unsettled, he muttered to himself. It felt like he had cut Haruto. Was it just an afterimage or something more? As he stood, 2 buttons popped off his coat, the aftermath of Haruto's strike just moments ago. Haruto saw the opening and activated his quick body skill, dashing at Muramasa with incredible speed. As Haruto swung his blade, Muramasa sensed the force behind it and smiled, clearly intrigued. This was becoming a worthy challenge. Their swords clashed with explosive force, sparks flying from the impact as Muramasa held his ground. He looked at Haruto, asking what he'd try next. Haruto, realizing he couldn't rely on his usual time flow perception, shifted tactics. He pushed Muramasa back slightly, then activated Stop Chain, freezing both Muramasa and his sword mid-motion. Muramasa was caught off guard. His body refused to move. Channeling power into his fist, Haruto bent low and launched a powerful strike using Crown Office, catching Muramasa completely off guard. Muramasa released his grip on his weapon and just barely managed to activate Steel Body in time. Haruto's punch hit with explosive force, sending Muramasa flying across the rooftop. Though rattled, he emerged unscathed. As he stood, Muramasa marveled at the precision and strength behind that punch. It hadn't been random at all. His eyes narrowed with realization. Haruto wasn't just talented, he was an awakened one. Haruto, frustrated, cursed under his breath. He'd landed a clean hit, and it still hadn't been enough. Then, Muramasa did something unexpected. He suggested they stop. Calmly walking toward Haruto, Muramasa bowed his head and sincerely apologized for mentioning his sister, vowing never to overstep like that again. Haruto was speechless and asked what had suddenly come over him. Muramasa simply picked up his sword and said he was leaving. Haruto shouted after him, frustrated that Muramasa was making the call alone. Their fight wasn't over yet. Muramasa replied that of course it wasn't, but the rematch would take place at his school. Haruto blinked in confusion. His school? Muramasa explained that Haruto had exceptional potential, but was still too weak. He hadn't reached the standard Muramasa needed. If Haruto wanted to master the sword, he should train at Muramasa's academy. There, he'd uncover deeper truths. Haruto recalled the cryptic advice from his future self. If he wanted to be a great space-time mage, he had to first live by the sword. Still, Haruto reminded Muramasa that trust wasn't something given so easily. Muramasa agreed, but added with a smirk that being stronger than Haruto should count for something. With that, he told Haruto he'd be waiting at his school and vanished from the rooftop. Left behind, Haruto suddenly felt something in his pocket. Pulling it out, he found an exchange permit, a transfer agreement between his academy and Muramasa's. He realized Muramasa must have slipped it in during the fight. Clenching his teeth, Haruto grumbled that the man really knew how to get under his skin. Meanwhile, Muramasa stood at the gates of his school, adjusting his coat. He thought to himself, Haruto is the real thing. Before the other sages tried to use him like a pawn, Muramasa would make sure to train him properly. And once Haruto was ready, he would help him overthrow the 7 sages and claim their power. Muramasa quietly vowed to sabotage Kerrigan's ambitions. Meanwhile, Haruto stood on the rooftop, examining the exchange student permit. The document detailed that its goal was to enhance the real capabilities of adventurers from various schools. It stated the program would run from July 1st to July 13th. Applicants had to be enrolled in an institution under the Adventurer Cultivation Agency, with student council members receiving special privileges at the host school. Just then, Yuzuki burst onto the rooftop, shouting triumphantly that she had found him and that today, without a doubt, he'd be joining the student council. Haruto stood up and replied that her timing was spot on, then nonchalantly told her he'd join. She was frozen in place, completely stunned that he had actually accepted. A week later, they were walking together at the zombie branch of the Adventure Cultivation Agency, and Yuzuki remarked how impressed she was. Not only had Haruto agreed to be on the student council, but he had also volunteered to transfer to her school as an exchange student. Haruto said it was only natural as a council member, though inwardly, he admitted it was mostly because of the enticing perks outlined in the document. Yuzuki explained that her school had a reputation for producing top-tier adventurers and was considered the pinnacle of adventurer training in Japan. She noted that it was an ultra-elite institution, requiring a magic deviation score above 70 for admission. Just before they entered the building, Yuzuki turned to him with excitement, urging him to do his best so they wouldn't fall behind. Haruto, a bit flustered, agreed, feeling slightly overwhelmed as they stepped into the massive lounge. Yuzuki suggested they first greet the board chairman as they made their way through the grand hall. Haruto noticed the other students eyeing them curiously, clearly wondering who these newcomers were. But he shrugged it off and resolved to go at his own pace. Sensing his unease, Yuzuki gently reassured him that there was nothing to worry about. She was right there with him. Haruto agreed, though a part of him wondered whether Yuzuki would really be okay in this demanding environment. Eventually, they reached the office on the 20th floor. Yuzuki pointed it out, and Haruto knocked on the door. Inside, Muramasa was already seated, waiting for them. He introduced himself as the board chairman, which left Haruto in disbelief. This was Muramasa's school? Muramasa rose and welcomed them, explaining that, in this golden age of mages, his school stood out by being entirely dedicated to swordsmanship. Even among schools under the Adventurer Cultivation Agency, they were unique. Rather than magic battles, they held sword duels, and during the exchange program, he expected them to climb to the top through dueling. Haruto was stunned when Muramasa pointed directly at him. But before he could say anything, Yuzuki nervously stammered that duels were never mentioned in the exchange program guidelines. However, Haruto asked Muramasa whether, by joining, he would have the chance to fight him again, leaving Yuzuki baffled and stammering, unsure what he meant by again. Muramasa explained that the student who claimed the top rank would earn the right to challenge the strongest individual at the school, him. Excited by this revelation, Haruto said this was exactly what he'd been hoping to hear, boldly declaring that he would rise to the top and defeat Muramasa as soon as possible so he could return home early, leaving Yuzuki stunned and visibly panicking. Haruto added that his only gripe was how their last fight had ended prematurely, and once they finished it, he'd have no further reason to stick around. Muramasa calmly responded that he had no objections, and that the school welcomed any swordsman aiming for the top, no matter their motivation or personality. He then accessed the system, issued them student IDs and class schedules, and explained these would grant them full access to the school's facilities, along with the enhanced privileges afforded to student council members. Haruto noticed his profile listed him as a level 98 swordsman course adventurer, placing him at rank 4395 out of 14,000, albeit with access to higher tier perks. He wondered if the ranking system worked like it did at Nakano, and considered whether he should challenge stronger students one after another to climb the ranks quickly. With all formalities completed, Muramasa wished them good luck and saw them off. As they walked through the hallway, Yuzuki cried out in disbelief, questioning how she was supposed to compete for the school's top spot. Haruto agreed with her, saying there was no reason for the newly appointed student council president to aim for that in the first place. He then began thinking about the most efficient way to rise through the ranks and considered where high-ranking students might typically gather, including places like elite lecture halls, student council chambers, duel arenas, the martial arts club building, the main classroom complex, the cafeteria, event halls, and even the chairman's office. With a determined grin, Haruto made up his mind to check those locations one by one. Moments later, on the second floor of the Adventurer Cultivation Agency, they entered a bustling cafeteria filled with students enjoying their meals. Yuzuki asked if he had forgotten breakfast, and he simply admitted that he had. Just then, a virtual robot materialized beside them, warmly welcoming them and asking if they were exchange students from another region of Japan. The robot explained the school's philosophy. Your breakfast sets the tone for your entire day, and encouraged them to eat heartily. Since they hadn't eaten at home, they were invited to enjoy as much food as they liked. Nearby, a holographic maid scanned their student IDs and played customized announcements for them. Yuzuki, amazed by the extravagant meal options, asked if it was all free, astonished at just how well-funded this school truly was. Grabbing a pair of tongs, she declared it was time for a proper inspection. Haruto urged her to go ahead, and she eagerly began evaluating the food. Overjoyed by the fully automated system and the precise balance of nutrients and calories, she exclaimed that this cafeteria was exactly what she had dreamed of, and insisted they needed to implement the same system at their own school. Watching the quirky new student council president revel in her excitement, Haruto reminded himself of the real reason he came to the cafeteria. Suddenly, a loud crash broke the hum of conversation, followed by a man's mocking voice accusing someone of having something he didn't deserve. Haruto turned and saw a group of students surrounding a lone boy. The boy timidly pleaded for them to stop, but the leader sneered, scoffing that it would be wasted on someone like him as he raised a sword threateningly. The student pleaded for the return of his sword, but the faction leader shouted at him to shut up, claiming this was punishment for sitting in their reserved seats without permission. Haruto, unsurprised, thought to himself that bullies existed even in elite schools. Teachers couldn't be everywhere, after all. Cafeterias, he knew, were often breeding grounds for this kind of behavior. Still, he was glad to have encountered them early. It meant he could take care of them now. The leader sneered that students without at least a double-digit ranking weren't even allowed to enter the cafeteria, and mockingly asked if the victim hadn't heard of that rule. The student stuttered that cafeteria seating shouldn't be restricted like that. But the leader grabbed him, calling him the God of Plagues with zero magic capacity, a title that caught Haruto's attention. With a cruel shove, the leader threw the student to the floor as the crowd burst into laughter, prompting Haruto to decide he'd seen enough and it was time to act. The leader smirked and mocked the boy, saying the sword would be wasted on him and that he'd keep it. Another student commented that the weapon looked valuable. Selling it to the guild shop could drastically raise their faction's budget. The leader casually dismissed him, waving his hand to send him off. But the bullied student, voice shaking yet determined, yelled that he wanted his sword back. It was a treasured gift from his father. Enraged, the leader screamed that he didn't care about anyone's sob story and swung a punch at him. The boy bracing himself, turning his head in preparation for the blow, but the punch never landed. Haruto had intervened, effortlessly catching the leader's punch midair with one hand, stunning both the bully and his victim. The leader shouted, demanding to know who Haruto was, unable to believe his strike had been stopped so easily. Haruto calmly introduced himself as an exchange student from Nakano School, stating he was searching for the student with the highest rank. He then directly asked the leader where to find that person. The leader refused defiantly, claiming he had no reason to answer. In response, Haruto tightened his grip, forcing the leader to his knees, causing him to cry out in pain. Haruto calmly said that someone hot-blooded like him was the perfect person to ask. The other faction members panicked, demanding to know who Haruto was and what he wanted. But Haruto simply glared and repeated his question. Where could he find the top-ranking student? Before the leader could answer, a commanding voice rang out, telling Haruto that was enough. A sword flew toward Haruto. He barely dodged it in time. As he leapt back, he sensed the presence of an invisible blade, one that had nearly struck him. Standing at the entrance was the true leader of the Rato faction, Radu Nobunaga. With his faction behind him, he sternly warned Haruto not to harass his schoolmates. Nobunaga, a third-year student and third in rank among the swordsman corps, also led the prestigious kitchen swordplay style school. Though school authorities often struggled with his wild behavior, Nobunaga's strength was nearly equal to that of the top-ranked student, making him a strong candidate for a teaching role upon graduation. The previously bullied student could hardly believe his eyes. Radu Nobunaga, known for his overwhelming power, had stepped in to confront a mere exchange student. Nobunaga asks how things had escalated so far. Haruto calmly replies that the faction members were bullying a student, motioning toward the victim, and says he only intervened to stop them. Clearly irritated, Nobunaga turns to his subordinates and demands to know if it's true. They quickly deny the accusation, insisting that Haruto is lying and claiming they were merely reserving seats for their faction. Displeased, Nobunaga steps forward, and without hesitation strikes one of them with a punch, then lands blows on the others, knocking them all to the ground. He scolds them, saying he could see through their lies just by the way their eyes shifted. Picking up the fallen student's sword, Nobunaga bows respectfully and offers an apology on behalf of his faction, acknowledging their wrongdoing as the faction leader. Haruto tells him there's no need for that, reassuring him that it's not a big deal. Nobunaga then returns the sword to the student, who accepts it with visible relief and gratitude. Haruto is taken aback by how principled and direct someone like Nobunaga is, despite being the head of such a dominant faction. Standing upright again, Nobunaga comments that he had hoped for a peaceful day, but letting the incident slide would tarnish the honor of his group. So he formally challenges Haruto to a duel and asks if he's willing to accept. The bullied student, clearly worried, urges Haruto to turn it down, reminding him that Nobunaga holds the third highest rank in the entire school. But Haruto agrees to the duel without a second thought, confidently telling Nobunaga that he accepts. Nobunaga thanks him, saying it simplifies things, and calmly walks off, telling Haruto to meet him at the arena after class. Haruto silently watches him leave. The shaken student then approaches Haruto and nervously asks if he's really going to be okay. He explains in disbelief that Nobunaga, a top-tier swordsman, is someone even the faculty respects, and asks why Haruto would take such a risk. Haruto responds with a question of his own. If the student is really okay living like this, he points out that if nothing is done, the bullying will likely continue until graduation. Clutching his sword tightly, the student admits he's grown used to enduring it, hoping things would eventually stop on their own. At that moment, Haruto notices the sword start to glow faintly with magic, and activates his Eye of Time, instantly recognizing the energy flowing from it. He then directly addresses the student's true self, asking how it felt when his sword was taken away. The student looks puzzled, so Haruto explains that even though he knew he couldn't win, he still stood up. Something deep inside compelled him. The student is left speechless. Haruto presses further, asking if he's really okay with things staying the way they are. After a long pause, the student finally admits he doesn't want to keep enduring it. He wants to stand up for himself and protect what's important to him. Haruto smiles, praises his courage, and extends a hand, asking for his name. The student takes his hand and introduces himself as Ravi Ibuki. Haruto responds with his own name. Haruto then urges Ibuki to challenge the faction leader to a formal duel. Though Ibuki looks stunned by the suggestion, Haruto reassures him, promising to make sure he wins. He proposes that they both aim for victory in their respective battles. Ibuki nods, now visibly resolved. Just then, Haruto's phone starts buzzing rapidly with a wave of incoming messages. Yuzuki texts Haruto, annoyed, asking where he went and complaining that she's still eating. Haruto sighs, clearly exasperated by her timing. Later, in the arena's waiting room, Yuzuki storms in, yelling at Haruto for recklessly agreeing to a sword duel on his very first day as an exchange student. Haruto tries to calm her down, replying vaguely that a lot happened. This only makes Yuzuki more frustrated as she demands to know if he really thinks that explanation is good enough. Haruto responds by reminding her that the board chairman himself told them to aim for the top, and he figured the fastest way up was to challenge the third-ranked student directly. Holding her head in disbelief, Yuzuki says she's amazed at how easily he managed to set up a duel. Haruto then reveals his bigger plan: to reach first place in the rankings, challenge and defeat the board chairman, and return home as soon as it's done. Overhearing this, Ibuki is stunned and asks if Haruto is serious. But after a moment, Ibuki calms down and admits that if anyone could pull it off, it's probably Haruto. He adds that defeating the board chairman would be a legendary achievement for their school. Ibuki also mentions that such a feat might even earn him the mythical skill cube, prompting Haruto to ask what that is, as it's the first he's heard of it. Ibuki explains that the school's founder, Kiryu Kagamitsu, mastered the deepest secrets of swordsmanship and sealed them within the skill cube. This revelation catches Haruto off guard, reminding him of Muramasa's earlier words about uncovering the secrets of the sword at this school. Haruto then asks Ibuki what exactly is inside the cube. Ibuki explains that it holds a unique technique only Kagamitsu ever mastered, the dimensional slash. Haruto is stunned and asks if it really lets someone cut through dimensions. Ibuki nods, saying that while it's only a legend, no one has ever seen the move performed. Haruto begins to wonder if such a skill might help his future self. Feeling a surge of determination, he clenches his fist and declares his renewed resolve. Looking at Ibuki, Haruto tells him that he'll be the opening act. Ibuki stammers but nods nervously, saying he'll give it his all. He then mentions that the bully was furious when challenged to the duel, and asks if Haruto has any secret plan to help him win. Haruto confidently assures him that if he follows the plan, victory is certain. He then asks to see Ibuki's sword. Later, in the arena, students from the Adventurer Cultivation Agencies and the OBU branch gather around the stage, cheering as Ibuki and the bully prepare to fight. The crowd buzzes with energy as the duel is about to begin. The bully arrogantly points his sword at Ibuki, calling him a fool for challenging someone out of his league. He mocks Ibuki, threatening to beat him senseless. Ibuki is clearly shaken but says nothing. In the crowd, Yuzuki watches with anxiety and asks Haruto if Ibuki will really be okay. Haruto answers with calm confidence, assuring her that Ibuki can handle this. Moments earlier, Haruto had given Ibuki a single clear instruction. The second the duel starts, he must draw his sword and execute one smooth, uninterrupted slash. No hesitation. Ibuki had asked, somewhat confused, if that was really all he needed to do. Haruto confirmed it, explaining that the bully would likely charge recklessly, assuming Ibuki was an easy target. Haruto had advised Ibuki to stay focused, keep his eyes on the enemy, and deliver a flawless draw without hesitation. He assured Ibuki that if he followed these instructions precisely, victory would be his. Trusting Haruto completely, Ibuki had nodded with determination, saying he believed in his plan. Now, in the present, Haruto watched from the sidelines with a smile, calling out encouragement and assuring Ibuki he could do it. On the other end of the arena, Muramasa silently observed the scene, watching the tension rise between the two fighters. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation as the duel was about to begin. The announcer introduced the competitors. Mitsu, Ruby, Ibuki, from Class 2 Fahrenheit, ranked 3,424th in the swordsman course, and Kenji Kentaro from Class 2A, a much higher-ranked student at 153rd. With a mocking tone, Kentaro told Ibuki that after he beat him, they should try to get along. Ibuki was quiet for a moment, then replied flatly that if Kentaro somehow lost, he should leave him alone for good. Then, with unexpected boldness, Ibuki shouted and called Kentaro a shithead, enraging him. Kentaro yelled back in disbelief at Ibuki's audacity. The crowd was stunned by Ibuki's outburst, but Haruto just grinned, clearly proud. Taking a deep breath, Ibuki steadied himself, gripping his sword tightly as he prepared for the match. As the duel officially began, Kentaro accessed his inventory, pulled out a second sword and pointed both weapons at Ibuki, ready to overwhelm him. Seeing this, Haruto was momentarily surprised. Either Kentaro was incredibly skilled or seriously overconfident. Just as expected, Kentaro charged straight at Ibuki, attempting to end it quickly. Ibuki remembered Haruto's warning not to avert his eyes, so he locked his gaze on Kentaro's advance and recalled the next step. At the perfect moment, Ibuki drew his sword and unleashed a swift, decisive slash. Kentaro, caught off guard by the speed of the attack, tried to block with both swords. But Ibuki's strike was so fast and forceful that it cut through both of them in a single motion. Kentaro was sent flying, slammed into the wall, coughed up blood, and collapsed unconscious. His two underlings were in shock, while their leader, Nobunaga, let out a sigh of disappointment. The announcer declared Mitsu, Ruby, Ibuki the winner, and the crowd erupted in applause. Yuzuki, astonished, turned to Haruto in disbelief, saying Ibuki had actually won. Haruto replied calmly that this result was expected. He revealed that Ibuki's sword was actually a magical weapon. Yuzuki was taken aback by the revelation. Earlier, Haruto had secretly used his Eye of Time skill to inspect the sword, discovering it had a hidden special effect. Contrary to what others believed, Ibuki didn't have zero magic power. His sword had been constantly draining it, which explained his low stats. Moreover, the sword possessed a unique ability to release all the magic it had absorbed in one massive burst. Since Ibuki had carried the sword for 3 years without ever defeating a monster, it had stored up immense energy. Curiously, Ibuki didn't seem to be aware that his sword was magical at all. But Haruto didn't mind. What mattered was that Ibuki had won. Not long after, in the lounge, Ibuki enthusiastically thanked Haruto, saying he owed his victory entirely to him. He expressed his amazement at how much had happened since Haruto arrived, saying he'd been impressed again and again. Haruto humbly credited Ibuki's victory to his own effort, assuring him it was his strength that won the duel. He planned to explain the sword's magical properties to him later, when they had more time. Turning back toward the arena, Haruto told Ibuki it was now his turn to step into battle. From above, Muramasa continued watching the events unfold with sharp focus. Nobunaga approached Haruto and declared that he would be fighting at full strength, as this match carried the pride of the Raider faction on his shoulders. Haruto welcomed the challenge with calm confidence, saying that was exactly what he wanted. The two drew their swords in unison, Nobunaga resting his weapon casually on his shoulder, while Haruto held his low at his side. They locked eyes, each wearing a confident, focused smile, ready to engage. As the host announced the start of the match, Haruto noted that Nobunaga didn't rush in. Instead, he stood firm, completely composed. From the crowd, Yuzuki and Ibuki watched anxiously, while members of the Raider faction, including a bruised and bandaged Kentaro, eagerly looked forward to their leader's victory. Muramasa remained silent but fully attentive. Haruto studied Nobunaga's stance, noticing how it seemed to have several apparent openings, but he couldn't tell if it was a trap. Even so, he resolved not to hold back. Charging forward, Haruto attempted to close the distance, only to be surprised as Nobunaga grinned and released an overwhelming pressure, one Haruto recognized. It was the same intense aura he had encountered before. Alarmed, Haruto stopped mid-sprint and activated his Eye of Time to analyze Nobunaga. To his surprise, there were no Chronos factors surrounding him. This led Haruto to suspect that Nobunaga didn't use time-based abilities, but instead relied on a mastery of killing intent, predicting movements based on subtle time flow cues rather than manipulating time directly. Nobunaga then slowly stepped forward, stopping just within striking distance, before exhaling and activating a hidden sword-style technique. He unleashed an invisible and elegant attack known as the Aesthetics of Nature, which tore deep grooves into the arena floor, the result of countless unseen slashes radiating in every direction. Realizing the threat, Haruto jumped into the air to evade, but Nobunaga suddenly appeared above him, cutting off his escape route. Haruto barely managed to block the overhead strike, strengthening his guard and holding firm, which seemed to impress Nobunaga. Seeing an opening, Haruto launched his Chrono Fist at Nobunaga's chest, but Nobunaga activated a technique called Steel Body, absorbing the attack without flinching, shocking Haruto. The powerful strike had done nothing. Nobunaga stood unharmed. Both fighters leapt backward to reevaluate their tactics. Nobunaga praised Haruto's skill in dealing with the formless slashes of his unique sword style, then curiously asked just how far Haruto's abilities really extended. Haruto, momentarily stunned, realized that Nobunaga had neutralized his chrono fist completely. Nobunaga then explained that his swordsmanship went beyond technique. It also focused on refining the body to be as durable and lethal as the blade itself. Taking that in, Haruto exhaled deeply and reminded himself to rely on his instincts, not just the eye of time. Nobunaga noticed the shift in Haruto's mindset, seeing that he had mentally centered himself. In response, Nobunaga sharpened his own concentration, preparing for what came next. Haruto activated his quick body technique just as Nobunaga engaged stealthy steps, heightening their speed and agility. Haruto lunged forward and unleashed a fierce slash, but Nobunaga dodged with sharp precision, countering with a clean, calculated swing. Haruto parried and twisted midair, retaliating with a spinning strike. Nobunaga narrowly evaded, bending backward with impressive control, then stabbed his sword into the ground to anchor himself, using the leverage to deliver a solid kick that sent Haruto flying. Haruto recovered midair, halting his momentum and regaining balance swiftly. Gripping his sword tightly, Haruto silently acknowledged the formidable power Nobunaga possessed. Driven by unwavering determination, he stepped forward once more, certain that he would prevail. He pulled his sword back for maximum force and launched a heavy strike, but Nobunaga blocked it with ease. Nobunaga countered, unleashing a powerful slash, daring Haruto to meet it head-on. Haruto leapt backward to avoid the blow, then, without touching the ground, launched another aerial strike, again parried by Nobunaga. The audience watched in awe, their eyes barely keeping pace with the flurry of attacks. Many were impressed by Nobunaga's skill, yet others questioned who this remarkable exchange student truly was. Yuzuki, in a panic, blurted out that the whole exchange program might need reconsideration, while Ibuki rooted for Haruto with loud enthusiasm. Meanwhile, supporters from Nobunaga's faction shouted their encouragement for their leader. Haruto told himself he had no option but to win. His future depended on it. This duel was not just a battle, but a turning point in his journey to reclaim his destiny. Nobunaga sensed the depth of Haruto's resolve, recognizing the weight he carried. He respected that resolve, but with his own burdens in mind, he knew he couldn't afford to lose either. Nobunaga intensified his aura, the sheer pressure amplifying his strength and conviction. Haruto was stunned by the force of it. It was like a crushing tide of willpower. Then, with his own purpose burning within, Nobunaga charged forward. As he closed the distance, memories surged within him. He recalled being 8 years old, telling his mother he was heading to school, her smile warm in response. But upon entering his classroom, he found his desk defaced with cruel insults, accusations, and slurs branding him a delinquent and mocking his poverty. His classmates laughed and feigned concern, ridiculing him with false sympathy. Nobunaga said nothing, sitting at his vandalized desk while laughter echoed around him. Later that day, at home, he overheard his mother pleading with a man to extend the repayment deadline on a loan. The man acknowledged her position. She was only the guarantor, abandoned by her husband. Yet the burden remained hers. She apologized, promising she'd find a way to repay him soon. Hearing her desperation filled Nobunaga with rage. He stormed to a nearby park, unleashing his anger on a punching bag he had tied to a tree. In that moment, he vowed to grow strong enough to protect his mother and rewrite their fate. Let me know if you'd like to continue with the next lines. As the years passed, Nobunaga took up boxing and began dominating the underground ring, racking up victory after victory. After each match, as he gathered his earnings, he reminded himself that this was just a step. He had to keep getting stronger, strong enough to protect those he loved. One day, as he exited the ring, a man appeared in the hallway, Muramasa, recognizing him as the once-forgotten junior high student who had risen to become an undefeated force in illegal boxing circuits. Muramasa asked if he was ready to be nominated, but Nobunaga eyed him warily, demanding to know who he was. Muramasa replied coolly, praising Nobunaga's physique and potential, yet warning that such talent would be wasted if he stayed on this path. The comment irritated Nobunaga, who demanded a clearer answer. In response, Muramasa asked if Nobunaga was fighting just to support his family financially. The insinuation stung, and Nobunaga pressed him aggressively, but Muramasa simply smiled and handed him an envelope, offering an invitation to learn the way of the sword, specifically the kitchen style. As Nobunaga opened the envelope, Muramasa explained that the kitchen style was ideal for martial artists like him, and that once he mastered it, he should come find him. Extending a formal hand, Muramasa welcomed Nobunaga to OBU Academy, a school devoted to swordsmanship, and granted him a full scholarship. But Nobunaga, mistrusting the sudden generosity, slapped the hand away and crumpled the envelope, calling it a likely scam. Yet something about the offer stirred him. Realizing the opportunity for true growth, his determination surged, and he accepted. He swore he'd do whatever it took to gain the strength he sought. 2 years later, Nobunaga had mastered the kitchen style, proof of his unyielding commitment to power. He began to understand why Muramasa, now revealed as the Academy's chairman, had recruited him. This was a place where strength ruled, where everything was decided by the sword. It attracted troubled youth and fighters with wild pasts. Muramasa's intent had been to shape Nobunaga into a leader for these outcasts, and eventually, he became the head of the school's most unruly faction. Muramasa remained a mystery, but he had given Nobunaga a path, a way to earn money and finally pay off his family's crippling debt. For that, Nobunaga felt a profound gratitude, even if it came from someone outside his world. The delinquents he now led may have looked like a gang of rejects, but to him, they were reflections of himself, broken yet still struggling forward. Holding that belief close, Nobunaga roared with confidence during the fight, vowing he wouldn't lose, startling Haruto with his fierce resolve. Then, he activated the secret technique of the kitchen style, scenic beauty, exponentially increasing the pressure exuding from his blade. Haruto was overwhelmed, sensing a dramatic surge in Nobunaga's strength. He realized that if this pace continued, he'd be crushed by Nobunaga's raw power. As Haruto locked eyes with Nobunaga, he sensed an unmatched honesty and straightforwardness, something no previous opponent had ever shown. He realized this time he couldn't depend on his time-manipulating powers. Instead, he chose to rely fully on his own strength, placing complete trust in the sword that had stood beside him through every fight. With that resolve, Haruto activated his Chaos Sword technique, summoning its raw power to stand toe-to-toe with Nobunaga. The energy he released rivaled the strength of Aga himself, pouring everything into his blade as he recalled the advice of his future self. That before he could master space-time magic, he had to live and fight as a true swordsman. The sudden power shift caught Nobunaga off guard, especially as he saw Haruto laughing, exhilarated by the heat of battle. Their blades collided with such force that both were flung backward. Sensing Haruto's joy, Nobunaga too felt a rush of excitement, and without hesitation, they both charged once more, unleashing all their might in a decisive clash. When their swords met again, the impact created a violent explosion that filled the arena with dense smoke. The audience fell silent. Yuzuki, Ibuki, and Nobunaga's supporters watched in nervous suspense. Muramasa, in contrast, remained composed, patiently awaiting the outcome. As the smoke cleared, both fighters appeared at the center of the battlefield. However, Nobunaga's blade was shattered, and blood trickled from his wounds. Stunned, he realized that Haruto had done the impossible. He had cleaved through Nobunaga's steel-reinforced body. As he collapsed, Nobunaga silently admitted that Haruto's sword held immeasurable power, perhaps even greater than the board chairman's. The host stumbled through the announcement, declaring Kudo Haruto the victor. The audience sat in stunned silence before breaking out in disbelief. Yuzuki appeared overwhelmed by the shock. Meanwhile, Haruto remained composed, watching over Nobunaga as healers hurried to his side. Observing quietly, Muramasa was deeply impressed. Haruto had defeated the Academy's third-ranked swordsman with skill alone, confirming to him that Haruto was indeed the one who had awakened. Muramasa now saw Haruto as a potential savior, capable of facing the terrifying foes that had haunted their world for half a century. Haruto looked down at his trembling hand, still feeling the weight of the duel's intensity. He hadn't expected the battle to be so exhilarating, and for a moment he simply relished the thrill of such a hard-fought encounter. Later, just outside the academy, Haruto stood speechless, as Nobunaga and his crew bowed deeply, offering a heartfelt apology for all the trouble they'd caused. Haruto replied with a calm, "It's all good now," glancing at Ibuki, who nodded in silent support. Nobunaga lifted his head and expressed gratitude, thankful Haruto hadn't made things worse for them. Then, with a grin, he slung an arm over Haruto's shoulder and confessed that, strangely enough, losing so badly felt oddly refreshing. Haruto couldn't help but notice how quickly Nobunaga had bounced back and how full of life he now seemed. But then, seeing other students staring at them, Haruto blushed and awkwardly asked Nobunaga to keep it down. He didn't want any more attention. Nobunaga chuckled, pulling back slightly and telling Haruto there was no need to be so shy. Nobunaga explained that since the radio faction had officially been defeated by Haruto, they were now pledged to support him and would come to his aid whenever he needed it. Haruto, taken aback by the sudden allegiance, nodded and said he understood, adding that if he ever found himself in a difficult situation, he wouldn't hesitate to call on them. Naga responded enthusiastically, promising Haruto they would always have his back. The following day, Haruto sat in his apartment watching the morning news. The report stated that while nationwide crime continued to fall according to the Metropolitan Police Department, monster-related damage from dungeon outbreaks was rising year by year. To address this, the police and Japan's self-defense forces were pushing for deeper cooperation with the Adventurers Guild. The newscaster also mentioned that, according to Guild data, Japan's GDP had maintained an annual growth rate of over 10% ever since dungeons began appearing globally 3 decades ago. After paying his respects to his late parents, Haruto slung his bag over his shoulder as the broadcast continued, explaining that Japan's expertise in dungeon exploration had given it a unique economic edge. The government was heavily investing in domestic companies and universities to develop anti-monster weaponry and magic stone technologies. Just then, Ryo handed Haruto a packed lunch, and he thanked her warmly. As he slipped on his shoes, she asked if he'd be attending that zombie school again. Haruto nodded, clarifying that he was still participating in a student exchange program. Ryo commented how lucky he was, saying the school buildings looked so impressive that she wished she could visit someday. Haruto laughed, admitting that while the campus looked grand, the interiors were quite traditional, but he was being treated like royalty nonetheless. Smiling, Ryo said it sounded wonderful that he could enjoy such a normal school experience. Touched by her cheerful expression, Haruto agreed, feeling deeply moved. He then asked if it was true she was starting middle school that day. She confirmed it, noting she still only had memories from elementary school and had a lot of catching up to do. Haruto gently patted her head and told her he'd be cheering her on. He vowed silently to protect her happiness and make sure she'd never feel sadness again. Later, on his way to school, Haruto strolled down a familiar street when he heard a woman shouting, pleading for someone to let her go. A man was forcefully gripping her arm, angrily demanding if she understood how much money he had spent on her. Nearby students began whispering, recognizing the woman. She was Lulu, a famous influencer with over 3 million followers, soon to debut as a singer. Haruto glanced over but initially decided to mind his own business, continuing on his way. Meanwhile, Lulu managed to break free and shouted at the man for ambushing her, mocking him for being possessive and shameless. Furious, the man warned her that a dungeon had recently opened nearby and it was dangerous, but she ran off regardless, only to stop when she heard a strange noise up ahead. Looking up, she saw a gaping dungeon gate open before her, and to her horror, monsters were emerging from within. The creatures were Imperial centipedes, classified as B-class annihilation level threats, with a subjugation rank of 5 and a recommended raid level of 1200, rendering her completely frozen in fear. Lulu collapsed, overcome with terror, weeping helplessly as the monstrous centipedes drew closer. Panic broke out among the bystanders, horrified by the appearance of monsters outside the dungeon. Some speculated it might be a case of migrating species, and in a frenzy of fear, the crowd scattered, abandoning Lulu as she trembled in terror. One of the massive centipedes opened its gaping jaws and lunged straight for her. The onlookers screamed, certain she was moments from death. But in that instant, Haruto launched himself toward the beast, and just as it was about to strike, the ground beneath its head split open. Its head was severed in a flash, erupting in a spray of green blood. The crowd gasped as the monster thrashed in agony. Haruto, unfazed, lifted Lulu in his arms and carried her to safety. She opened her eyes in disbelief, stunned to find herself in his embrace. He gently placed her down and urged her to run to safety, then turned to walk away, leaving her speechless. As Haruto paused near the centipede's corpse, he debated getting further involved. Though he disliked unnecessary trouble, he knew he couldn't live with himself if he let innocent people die. But to his shock, the severed head began regenerating, slowly reattaching to the body. Realizing it had a powerful regeneration ability, Haruto knew the danger wasn't over. Just then, a team of adventurers arrived at the scene. Their leader assessed the chaos, checked on the civilians, and introduced the group as members of the Adventurers Guild from the Minato District branch. Spotting Haruto, they warned him to step back or he'd be killed. One adventurer identified the monster as a B-class annihilation-level creature with a subjugation rank of S, requiring a raid level above the leader. Clearly worried, admitted their average team level was only 80, far too low to handle it. Another suggested calling for backup from the Seven Sages, but the leader shouted it would be too late by the time they arrived. With no other option, the adventurers prepared to fight, determined to protect the civilians despite the overwhelming odds. Haruto observed quietly from a distance. Just as one of the monster's heads lunged toward two of the adventurers, they braced for impact, fully aware they couldn't withstand the blow. But a glowing chain suddenly appeared, halting the attack midair. Haruto had intervened using his stop chain skill. The adventurers, stunned, wondered aloud who had saved them. Haruto, unbothered by revealing his power, used space-time magic to restrain the beast, then activated his quick body skill, launching himself at high speed. Sensing the threat, the centipede twisted and spat a stream of toxic liquid at him. Haruto evaded it in a blink, noticing how the ground sizzled and dissolved where the poison struck. He immediately recognized it as a corrosive poison and made it a priority to limit damage to the area. Suddenly, the centipede appeared beneath him and clamped its jaws shut, seemingly cutting him in two. But in a shocking turn, Haruto vanished like a ghostly projection, baffling the monster. Thanks to his avatar replay skill, Haruto had escaped. What the monster hit was only a time echo of him from 3 seconds earlier. Haruto seized the opening and unleashed a powerful sword slash, cleaving off the monster's head in one clean motion. The adventurer leader stood stunned as the massive head thudded to the ground. Nearby, Lulu watched the scene unfold in wide-eyed amazement. Haruto calmly approached the severed head and held his hand above it, activating a modified version of his material rewind skill to lock the centipede's body in the exact moment it had been decapitated, effectively preventing any regeneration. Confident the creature couldn't recover that head, he raised his sword once more and took a ready stance, prepared to eliminate the remaining 7 heads without hesitation.